They said she committed social suicide the moment she opened her mouth. In a London ballroom glittering with diamonds and aristocratic power, Adeline Carrington, a mere merchant's daughter, did the unthinkable. She challenged Duke Adrian Hawthorne in front of 300 witnesses, accusing him of profiting from children's blood in his coal mines. The room went silent. The orchestra stopped mid-note, and the Duke's face turned to stone. What happened next would destroy her family, exile her from society, and ignite a scandal that would burn through London's highest circles. But that was only the beginning. Stay with us until the end to see how one woman's courage broke the iron grip of England's most powerful duke. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. The chandeliers blazed like captured stars above the Ashford ballroom, each crystal prism scattering rainbow light across the marble floor where London's elite swirled in their winter finery. December 1857 had brought bitter cold to the streets outside, but within these walls, wealth generated its own heat. Furs and silks brushing against polished mahogany, champagne flowing like rivers of gold, and conversation humming with the particular music of people who believed themselves untouchable. Adeline Carrington stood near the towering windows, watching snowflakes drift past the glass like falling stars, and tried to ignore the tightness in her chest that always came at these events. The emerald gown her mother had insisted upon felt like armor she didn't know how to wear, too tight at the waist, too revealing at the shoulders, designed to catch a wealthy husband rather than allow her to breathe properly. "Stop fidgeting," her mother hissed from beside her, snapping her fan shut with practiced precision. Margaret Carrington had the sort of beauty that age refined rather than diminished, all sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes. "Lord Pemberton is looking this way again. Smile, for heaven's sake." "Lord Pemberton is 73 and looking for his fourth wife," Adeline replied, keeping her voice low. "I'd rather throw myself in the Thames." "Don't be dramatic. Your father didn't build his shipping empire so you could waste opportunities with that wretched tongue of yours." Her mother's smile never wavered, even as her words cut. "The Ashfords invited us because they respect money, even if they don't respect how we earned it. Don't embarrass us." Adeline bit back her response. She'd had this argument 1,000 times, in 1,000 variations. Her father, Thomas Carrington, had clawed his way from dock worker to shipping magnate through ruthless intelligence and tireless work. But no amount of money could buy what these people had been born with, the casual certainty that they belonged, that the world owed them its finest things simply for existing. She watched the dancers spin past, lords and ladies whose families had held power since before anyone could remember. And there, moving through the crowd like a ship cutting through calm water, was the man everyone had come to see. Duke Adrian Hawthorne. Even Adeline, who prided herself on being unimpressed by titles, felt something shift in the room when he entered. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of aristocratic features that painters loved: strong jaw, high cheekbones, dark hair swept back from a broad forehead. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Cold gray, like winter sky before a storm, and currently scanning the crowd with the detached interest of a man surveying his possessions. Because in many ways, this was his crowd. At 32, Adrian Hawthorne controlled more land than some countries, held seats on a dozen boards, and could whisper a word that would make or break fortunes. He wore his power like his perfectly tailored black coat, so naturally that it seemed part of his skin. "Magnificent, isn't he?" A voice beside Adeline made her turn. Beatrice Ashford, their hostess's daughter, had materialized with 2 glasses of champagne. She was everything Adeline was supposed to want to be: blonde, delicate, perfectly mannered. They'd been friends once before society's invisible lines had been drawn more firmly. "They say he's finally considering marriage. Every mother in London is sharpening her claws." "He looks like he enjoys being hunted," Adeline observed, taking the offered glass. Beatrice laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Oh, he does. Adrian Hawthorne has never done anything he didn't want to do. But eventually, even a duke needs an heir." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "They also say he's about to announce a major charitable initiative tonight. Something about improving conditions for workers. Very progressive." Adeline's fingers tightened on her glass. "Progressive. Don't say it like that. It's generous of him to care at all about the lower classes." "The lower classes," Adeline repeated, her voice flat. She thought of the letters she'd been receiving, smuggled to her through a reformist group she'd quietly joined. Letters from the north, from Durham, from the coal mines that made Duke Hawthorne's fortune. Letters describing children as young as 6 working in darkness, their lungs filling with black dust, their bodies broken by rockfalls and flooded shafts. Progressive. Adeline, Beatrice warned, recognizing the look on her friend's face. Whatever you're thinking, don't. But Adeline had already stopped listening, because across the ballroom, Duke Hawthorne had taken his position near the grand staircase, and the orchestra was quieting. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, creating a clear path of polished marble between the Duke and his audience. Lord Ashford stepped forward, raising his glass. Distinguished guests, it is my great honor to host His Grace tonight. The Duke of Hawthorne has asked to share some exciting news regarding his continued commitment to the welfare of this great nation. Applause rippled through the crowd, polite and measured. Adrian Hawthorne acknowledged it with a slight nod, then began to speak. His voice was deep, cultured, carrying easily through the vast room without seeming to raise in volume. Thank you all for coming tonight. As many of you know, my family's holdings span from the coal fields of Durham to the textile mills of Lancashire. These enterprises provide employment for thousands, generating wealth not just for our estate, but for the communities they serve. More applause. Adeline felt something hot and sharp building in her chest. Recently, I've become aware that we can do more, must do more, to ensure the well-being of those who labor in our service. Therefore, I'm announcing the establishment of the Hawthorne Workers Fund, which will provide medical care and education opportunities for employees and their families. The crowd erupted in genuine enthusiasm now. This was the kind of noble generosity they loved, visible, praiseworthy, requiring nothing from them personally. Margaret Carrington jabbed her elbow into Adeline's ribs. You see, he cares about workers. Stop looking so mutinous. But Adeline had seen the truth in those letters. The Workers' Fund would be administered by the same overseers who currently turned blind eyes to safety violations. The same men who hired children because small hands fit into tighter spaces. The same system that crushed human beings into profit margins. Adrian Hawthorne continued, his voice warming with what might have been genuine feeling. We who have been blessed with privilege carry a sacred duty to those less fortunate. It is not charity, but responsibility. Then why are children dying in your minds? The words cut through the ballroom like a rifle shot. For a moment, Adeline didn't realize she'd spoken aloud. But the sudden silence, the hundreds of faces turning toward her in shock and horror, made it unmistakably clear. She'd actually said it. Beatrice made a small, strangled sound. Margaret Carrington's face went white, then red, then white again. And across the room, Duke Adrian Hawthorne's gray eyes locked onto Adeline with the focused intensity of a predator spotting prey. I beg your pardon? His voice remained calm, but something dangerous moved beneath it. Adeline's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to apologize, to claim she'd misspoken, to disappear into the crowd and salvage what she could. But she thought of those letters, of a boy named Thomas, the same name as her father, who'd been crushed when a support beam collapsed. He'd been 7 years old. She stepped forward, her champagne glass somehow still steady in her hand. I said, Your Grace, that children are dying in your coal mines. While you're standing here in this beautiful room, accepting praise for a workers' fund, there are boys younger than 10 hauling coal in darkness. They breathe poison. They work 16-hour days. And when they die, because they do die frequently, their families receive nothing but dismissal and replacement. You could have heard a pin drop. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman gasped. Lord Ashford looked like he might faint, but Adeline kept her eyes on the Duke, watching his expression shift from surprise to something colder, harder. Miss, he let the question hang. Carrington, Adeline Carrington. Miss Carrington. He said her name like he was examining a specimen under glass. Those are serious accusations. I assume you have evidence to support such claims. I have letters from the miners themselves, from the families who've lost children, from the women who have to... Letters. Adrian Hawthorne descended 2 steps, moving closer. His height became more apparent, his presence more overwhelming. Anonymous letters, I presume. From people who may have any number of motivations for making false claims? They're not false. Have you visited these mines yourself, Miss Carrington? Have you inspected the conditions with your own eyes? Or are you simply repeating gossip that confirms what you wish to believe? Heat flooded Adeline's face. I don't need to visit a coal mine to know that child labor is wrong, that treating human beings as disposable is wrong, that— What you know, the Duke interrupted, his voice dropping to a tone that somehow carried more weight than shouting, is what every sheltered young woman of your class knows: sentiment without understanding, morality without experience. You stand here in your fine dress, sipping champagne purchased with your father's shipping profits, profits that surely come with their own ethical complications, and you dare to lecture me about responsibility? The crowd murmured approval. Adeline felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. My father pays fair wages. Your father, Adrian continued, moving down another step, built his fortune on the backs of dock workers and sailors. I'm certain their conditions are absolutely pristine, or perhaps you simply choose not to see what's inconvenient to your righteous narrative. That's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. Commerce requires hard choices. Leadership requires understanding nuance. But you wouldn't know about leadership, would you, Miss Carrington? He'd reached the bottom of the stairs now, standing close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes. You understand rebellion, defiance, the easy pleasure of criticizing from a position of perfect ignorance. But leadership? Responsibility? These are clearly beyond your comprehension. Adeline's hands shook. I understand that children shouldn't die for your profit. You understand nothing. His voice cracked like a whip. You burst into polite society with the manners of a dock worker, which I suppose is fitting, given your origins, and throw accusations at people who have dedicated their lives to serving this nation. You shame your father, who at least had the decency to earn his place through work rather than theatrical displays. You shame your mother, who clearly failed to teach you the most basic principles of civilized behavior. And you shame yourself. The words hit like physical blows. Adeline felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Adrian Hawthorne turned, addressing the crowd now, his voice carrying that particular tone of aristocratic certainty. This is what comes of pretending that money alone can buy class, that allowing merchants' daughters into society somehow elevates them. Miss Carrington has proven tonight that breeding will always tell. You can dress her in silk, but you cannot teach her dignity, cannot teach her place, cannot teach her the discipline and grace required of a proper wife. He looked back at Adeline, and his final words landed with surgical precision. You are not fit to be any man's wife, Miss Carrington, and certainly not fit to lecture your betters on morality. The ballroom erupted in scandalized whispers. Adeline stood frozen, every word burning into her skin like a brand. She saw her mother's horrified expression, her father pushing through the crowd with fury and helplessness warring on his face. She saw Beatrice looking away, unable to meet her eyes. She saw 300 witnesses to her complete and total humiliation, and she saw Duke Adrian Hawthorne turn away, dismissing her like a servant who'd spilled wine on his coat. Pride, the same pride that had made her speak in the first place, snapped into place like armor. Adeline straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked toward the exit with her head high. She would not run, would not cry, would not give them that satisfaction. But the damage was done, and everyone in that room knew it. Thomas Carrington's study smelled of tobacco and salt air, a combination that usually comforted Adeline. Tonight, it made her stomach turn. Do you have any idea what you've done? Her father's voice was quiet, which somehow made it worse than shouting. He stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. Any idea at all? I told the truth. Adeline sat in the leather chair across from his desk, still wearing her emerald gown, feeling like she was facing execution. About the mines, about the children. Someone had to destroy our family's reputation? Someone had to publicly insult the most powerful duke in England? Thomas turned, and the pain in his eyes cut deeper than his anger. I built this company for you, Adeline. Everything I did, every risk I took was to give you a better life. And in one night, you've undone 20 years of work. Father, those children, I know about the children. His fist came down on the desk, making papers jump. Then, softer. You think I don't know what happens in coal mines? What happens on ships? In factories?
I came from that world, Adeline. I crawled out of it covered in blood and sweat and other men's dreams. And I learned one lesson that you apparently refuse to understand. You cannot change the world by making enemies of the people who run it. So we just accept it? Let children die because changing things would be inconvenient? Thomas laughed, a bitter sound. Inconvenient. 3 of my business partners sent letters today canceling contracts. The London Exchange suddenly finds irregularities in our accounts that need investigation. Ships I was negotiating to purchase are no longer available. That's not inconvenient, Adeline. That's destruction. Systematic, calculated destruction. The words settled over her like falling snow. The Duke? Who else? Hawthorne owns half the men who canceled on me. The other half are terrified of crossing him. And can you blame them? You humiliated him in front of London society. Did you think there would be no consequences? Adeline's mother entered, still in her ball gown, her face haggard. The Ashfords have made it clear we're no longer welcome in their home. The Pembrokes the same. Beatrice sent a note, very apologetic, very final. We're being cut off, Thomas, systematically excluded. Because I spoke the truth, Adeline repeated, but the words sounded hollow now. Because you were arrogant, her father corrected. You thought your righteousness would protect you, that being right was the same as being smart. But the world doesn't work that way, and now we're all paying the price. The study door burst open. Henry Carrington, Adeline's younger brother, stood in the doorway, still in his school clothes. At 16, he had their father's dark eyes and their mother's delicate features, currently twisted with teenage outrage. Is it true? He demanded. What they're saying at school? That Adeline called the Duke of Hawthorne a murderer in front of everyone? Go to your room, Henry, Margaret said wearily. They're saying our family is finished, that father's business is collapsing, that Adeline is... He stopped, looking at his sister. They're saying terrible things about you. Of course they are. Adeline stood, suddenly exhausted. I challenged their perfect world, suggested that maybe nobility doesn't equal virtue. They'll never forgive that. Then you should apologize, Henry insisted. Write to the Duke, explain it was a mistake, say you were overcome with, I don't know, female hysteria or something. Female hysteria? Adeline repeated, something dangerous in her voice. If it saves father's business, what does pride matter? You made the mistake, you should fix it. Thomas held up a hand. Enough. Henry, to your room, now. He waited until the boy left, then turned back to Adeline. He's not entirely wrong, though. A public apology might... No! The word came out harder than Adeline intended. I won't apologize for telling the truth. Those children are still dying, Father. Whether or not I apologize, whether or not it saves your business, they're still dying. And if my speaking up makes me unmarriageable, makes me a social pariah, fine. But I won't apologize for caring about human life. Such noble principles, her mother said coldly. Will they feed us when the business fails? Will they pay Henry's school fees? Will they keep a roof over our heads? Margaret, Thomas began. No, let me finish. She needs to hear this. Margaret turned the full force of her attention on Adeline. You think you're being brave, heroic even, but you're being selfish, childishly, catastrophically selfish. Your actions don't just affect you, they affect all of us.
And for what? For children you've never met? In minds you've never seen, based on letters that could be lies? They're not lies. You don't know that. You've chosen to believe them because it feeds your sense of superiority. Poor little rich girl, so much more moral than everyone else. Well, congratulations. You've proven your point and destroyed your family in the process. The words hit like physical blows. Adeline looked to her father, hoping for support, but Thomas just looked tired. Your mother is right, he said quietly, about the consequences, if not the methods. We need to be strategic now. Careful. The Duke's influence is extensive. Over the next 3 days, Adeline watched her father's empire begin to crumble in slow motion. It started with small things, delayed shipments, canceled meetings, banks suddenly reluctant to extend credit they'd previously offered freely. Then larger problems emerged. A ship carrying valuable cargo mysteriously failed inspection and was impounded. A warehouse fire that the authorities ruled suspicious, leading to insurance complications. Investors pulling out of deals that had seemed certain. And through it all, The whispers followed Adeline everywhere. She went to the dressmaker and found herself suddenly without an appointment. The baker who'd always greeted her cheerfully now looked away. Even the servants in her own house treated her differently, not with disrespect exactly, but with a kind of pitying distance, as if she were already a ghost. The newspapers were worse. The society pages, which had previously ignored the Carringtons as beneath notice, now found them endlessly fascinating. The Carrington scandal became a recurring headline, with barely veiled commentary about social climbers and the importance of knowing one's place. One editorial, written by a journalist known to be friendly with Duke Hawthorne's circle, was particularly cutting. Miss A.C.'s recent outburst demonstrates the danger of allowing commerce to mingle too freely with nobility. Money, it seems, can purchase neither breeding nor wisdom. The young lady would be better served learning the domestic arts appropriate to her station than attempting to lecture her betters on matters of state and business she cannot possibly comprehend. Adeline threw the paper into the fire and watched it burn. On the fourth night after the ball, her father called a family meeting. His face had aged a decade in days, new lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. "I've made a decision," he announced, his voice rough. "Adeline will go to Bath to stay with your Aunt Catherine for the season, perhaps longer." Silence crashed through the room. Margaret's teacup rattled against its saucer. Henry looked up from his book, confused. "Bath?" Adeline repeated. "That's exile." "That's survival," Thomas corrected. "Your presence here is making everything worse. Every time you're seen, it reminds people of the scandal. Reminds the Duke that he was challenged. If you're gone, maybe the pressure will ease. Maybe I can rebuild what's been damaged. So I'm being sent away. Punished for telling the truth." "You're being sent away to protect this family." Her father's control finally cracked. "Do you understand what's happening here? I've lost 30% of my business in 4 days. 4 days, Adeline. At this rate, we'll be bankrupt by spring. Your brother will have to leave school. Your mother will have to dismiss the servants. We'll lose this house, our reputation, everything. And you stand there talking about truth like it's some kind of shield." "Thomas, please." Margaret reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "No, she needs to understand. The Duke of Hawthorne is not some petty merchant who'll forget an insult in a few weeks. He's a man who's never been challenged, never been denied, never been told he's wrong. And Adeline didn't just challenge him, she humiliated him in front of 300 witnesses. He will destroy us completely and methodically, unless we find a way to make this right." "And making it right means hiding me away like a shameful secret?" Adeline's voice shook. "It means giving him time to forget his anger. It means removing the target from his immediate sight. It means survival, Adeline. Sometimes that's the best we can do." She looked at her mother, who wouldn't meet her eyes. At Henry, who looked torn between sympathy and resentment. At her father, who seemed to have aged 20 years in 4 days. "When do I leave?" she asked quietly. "Tomorrow. The carriage will come at dawn." That night, Adeline stood at her window and watched the snow fall over London. Somewhere in this city, in his massive townhouse or one of his country estates, Duke Adrian Hawthorne was probably sleeping peacefully, secure in his power, confident in his righteousness, utterly unconcerned with the lives his business practices destroyed, and she was being sent away like a criminal. But as she packed her trunks in the early morning darkness, as she prepared to leave the only home she'd ever known, Adeline made herself a promise. This wasn't over. The Duke thought he'd won by silencing her, by crushing her family's business, by making an example of what happened to people who challenged their betters. He was wrong. In Bath, away from the immediate pressure of London society, she would have time, freedom, the ability to investigate properly, to gather real evidence that couldn't be dismissed as mere gossip or feminine hysteria. Duke Adrian Hawthorne had made a mistake. He'd assumed that humiliating her would break her spirit, that exile would make her forget. Instead, he'd given her exactly what she needed: distance, motivation, and nothing left to lose. The war between them had just begun. He just didn't know it yet. The journey to Bath took 2 days through winter roads that seemed designed to punish travelers. Adeline sat across from her maid, Sarah, the only servant her mother had allowed to accompany her, and watched the frozen countryside roll past in shades of white and gray. Sarah kept trying to make conversation, pointing out landmarks or commenting on the weather, but eventually gave up and retreated into silence. Adeline appreciated the quiet. It gave her time to think, to plan, to transform her anger into something more useful than rage. Aunt Catherine's house appeared through the snow like a prison carved from stone. It sat on the outskirts of Bath, far enough from the fashionable center to be unfashionable, close enough to make exile feel deliberate. The building itself was Georgian, all symmetry and proportion, with none of the warmth that made a house feel like home. Catherine Hartley met them at the door, a thin woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been widowed young and childless always, traits that had left her with a reputation for being difficult and opinionated, which Adeline suspected was exactly why her father had sent her here. "So you're the girl who challenged a duke," Catherine said by way of greeting. "Foolish or brave, I haven't decided which." "Does it matter?" Adeline climbed down from the carriage, her legs stiff from 2 days of travel. "It might. Come inside before you freeze. Sarah, see that the bags are brought up to the blue room." Catherine turned without waiting for acknowledgement, leading Adeline through a narrow entrance hall into a drawing room that smelled of lavender and old books. A fire crackled in the hearth, the only source of warmth in the austere space. Catherine settled into a high-backed chair and studied Adeline with the intensity of a scientist examining a specimen. "Your father's letter said you humiliated yourself and ruined his business," she said finally. "Care to give me your version?" Adeline almost laughed. After days of being lectured, pitied, and condemned, the directness was refreshing. "I told Duke Hawthorne that children were dying in his coal mines. He didn't appreciate the criticism." "I imagine not. Men like Adrian Hawthorne believe criticism is a form of violence against the natural order." Catherine poured tea from a pot that sat on a small table beside her. "Milk or sugar?" "Neither. You know the Duke?" "Everyone knows the Duke, or thinks they do. Milk it is. You look half frozen." She prepared the cup despite Adeline's protest and held it out. "I knew his father better. Terrible man. Gambled away half the estate before dying young and leaving Adrian to clean up the mess. The boy did it too. Rebuilt everything by the time he was 25. Ruthless, efficient, utterly without mercy for anyone who stood in his way." Adeline accepted the tea, grateful for the warmth, even if she didn't want to admit it. "That's supposed to make me sympathetic to him?" "It's supposed to make you understand what you're up against. Adrian Hawthorne learned early that sentiment is weakness and power is survival. He won't forgive your challenge because he can't. It would set a precedent that others might challenge him too." Catherine sipped her own tea. "Your father thinks sending you here will make this go away. What do you think?" "I think the Duke won't stop until my family is destroyed, and hiding in Bath won't change that." "Smart girl, so what will you do about it?" The question caught Adeline off guard. "What can I do? I'm exiled, discredited, and my family's business is collapsing. The Duke has won." "Has he?" Catherine set down her cup with a sharp click. "From where I sit, Adrian Hawthorne has proven that you touched a nerve. Men don't crush their enemies this thoroughly unless they're afraid of something. What is he afraid of, do you think?" Adeline considered this. "The truth getting out. About the mines." "Exactly. Which means the truth is worth protecting, worth fighting for." Catherine stood and crossed to a writing desk in the corner. She pulled out a folded newspaper and handed it to Adeline. "This arrived yesterday. Read the marked article." Adeline scanned the page until she found the circled piece. It was a letter to the editor, signed only with initials CW, describing unsafe conditions in northern industrial sites. The language was careful, legalistic, but the message was clear. Someone was documenting the same abuses Adeline had accused the Duke of. "Who is CW?" she asked. "Caleb Ward, an industrialist with reform tendencies and more courage than sense. He owns textile mills in Manchester and has been campaigning for factory regulations for years. The establishment despises him, of course. Can't have someone suggesting that profit and human decency aren't mutually exclusive." Catherine returned to her chair. "He's in Bath this month, some sort of conference on industrial development. If you're serious about fighting Hawthorne, Ward might be able to help you." "Help me how?" "Evidence, connections, credibility. Ward has been investigating working conditions throughout England for a decade. If anyone has proof of what's happening in Hawthorne's mines, it's him." Catherine fixed Adeline with a sharp look. "But understand this. Approaching Ward means committing to this path. No more pretending you'll apologize and go back to London society. You'll be choosing sides in a war that's been brewing for years. Are you ready for that? Adeline thought of her father's haggard face, her mother's accusations, Henry's resentment. She thought of the boy named Thomas who'd been crushed in a coal mine at age 7. She thought of Duke Adrian Hawthorne's cold eyes as he'd declared her unfit to be any man's wife. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." Catherine smiled, and for the first time, Adeline saw approval in her aunt's expression. "Good. Then we start tomorrow. Tonight, you rest. You're going to need your strength." The next morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. Adeline dressed in her simplest gown, a dark blue wool that wouldn't attract attention, and accompanied Catherine to the Sydney Hotel, where the Industrial Development Conference was being held. The hotel lobby bustled with men in dark suits, all carrying papers and arguing about tariffs and trade routes. No one gave Adeline and Catherine a second glance. Women at such events were assumed to be wives or secretaries, invisible in their insignificance. Caleb Ward turned out to be nothing like Adeline expected. She'd imagined someone old, academic, perhaps physically frail. Instead, Ward was in his early 40s, tall and solid, with the kind of rough hands that suggested he'd actually worked in the mills he owned. His face was weather-worn and kind, his eyes sharp with intelligence. Catherine made the introductions in a quiet corner away from the crowd. "Mr. Ward, this is my niece, Adeline Carrington. I believe you share certain concerns about industrial conditions." Ward's eyebrows rose. "The Adeline Carrington? The woman who challenged Duke Hawthorne at the Ashford ball?" "News travels fast," Adeline said, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "In reform circles, you're something of a hero. Most people are too afraid of Hawthorne to speak publicly. You had courage." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Adeline shook it. His grip was firm, respectful. "Though I suspect that courage has cost you dearly." "My family's business is being systematically destroyed," Adeline admitted. "But that's not why I'm here. I need proof, Mr. Ward, real evidence of the conditions in Hawthorne's minds, letters and testimonies that can't be dismissed as gossip or lies." Ward's expression grew serious. "Evidence like that could be dangerous, for both of us." "I'm already dangerous to the Duke. What's a little more risk?" He laughed, a genuine sound that made several nearby industrialists glance over. "Mrs. Hartley, your niece is either very brave or very reckless. I haven't decided which." "Neither have I," Catherine replied, "but she's determined, and that counts for something." Ward considered this, then nodded. "Come to my rooms in an hour. 4th floor, room 42. I'll show you what I have. But Miss Carrington, once you see this evidence, once you know the full scope of what's happening, there's no going back. You'll carry that knowledge forever." "Are you certain you want that burden?" "I already carry it," Adeline said quietly. "I just need the proof to make others see what I see." An hour later, Adeline sat in Caleb Ward's hotel room, surrounded by documents that made her stomach turn. Photographs, new technology, expensive and rare, showed children covered in coal dust, their eyes hollowed by exhaustion and malnutrition. Medical reports documented lung diseases, broken bones, burns from mining accidents. Testimony after testimony from workers who'd witnessed deaths, injuries, deliberate neglect. "This is just from Durham," Ward explained, sorting through papers with practiced efficiency. "Hawthorne's largest coal operation, but it's similar in his other holdings. The pattern is consistent: maximize production, minimize costs, ignore safety regulations that are barely enforced anyway." "Why haven't you published this?" Adeline asked, her hand shaking as she examined a photograph of a boy who couldn't have been more than 8, his small body twisted from years of crawling through mine shafts. "I've tried. Every newspaper I approach either refuses outright or accepts the story, then mysteriously kills it before publication. Hawthorne's influence reaches far, Miss Carrington. He owns shares in most major publications. The ones he doesn't own he controls through friends and business associates. So this evidence is useless? Not useless, just difficult to leverage." Ward pulled out a ledger, flipping to a marked page. "These are the official reports Hawthorne's mines submit to the government. Notice anything interesting?" Adeline scanned the columns of numbers. The accident rates are remarkably low.
Suspiciously low, because they're falsified. I have testimony from 3 different overseers who were paid to underreport accidents and deaths.
Children who die in the mines are often listed as runaways or family relocations. The truth gets buried along with the bodies. The casual horror of it made Adeline's vision swim. How can this be allowed? There are laws. Laws require enforcement. Enforcement requires political will. And political will evaporates when a duke controls half the economy in a region. Ward's voice was gentle but firm. This is why I've spent a decade building this case. One piece of evidence can be dismissed, but hundreds, thousands, eventually the weight becomes undeniable. Then why hasn't it worked yet? Because I'm one industrialist fighting an entire system. I need allies with credibility, with platforms, with power of their own. He looked at her directly. I need people who are willing to risk everything to force change. Adeline understood what he was offering. You want me to help you build a public case against Hawthorne. I want you to be the voice this movement needs. You've already proven you're willing to speak truth to power. Now we need to give you the evidence to back up that truth so thoroughly that even Hawthorne can't bury it. My credibility is destroyed. I'm a disgraced merchant's daughter hiding in Bath. Who would listen to me? More people than you think. The reform movement isn't just academics and fringe politicians anymore. We have sympathetic members of parliament, journalists who are tired of being silenced, even some industrialists who recognize that the current system is unsustainable. Ward gathered the documents back into organized piles. But we need a catalyst, someone whose challenge to Hawthorne has already captured public attention, someone who represents the possibility that ordinary people can stand up to entrenched power. I'm not ordinary, Adeline protested. I'm privileged, educated, wealthy. You're a woman in a world run by men. You're the daughter of new money in a society controlled by old aristocracy. You're young and unmarried and just publicly humiliated by the most powerful duke in England. Ward's expression was earnest. To the people suffering in those mines, to the families watching their children die, you're far more ordinary than you realize. And that's exactly why your voice matters. Adeline looked down at the photograph of the twisted boy, at the medical reports documenting preventable deaths, at the ledgers proving systematic fraud. She thought about the easy path: apologize, retreat, marry some lesser merchant's son, and pretend she'd never seen any of this. Then she thought about the real Thomas, crushed at 7 years old, and knew there was never really a choice. What do I need to do? She asked. Over the next 3 weeks, Adeline's education in industrial reform accelerated at a pace that left her breathless. Ward introduced her to his network: lawyers documenting worker abuses, physicians treating mining injuries, former overseers willing to testify about corruption. Each meeting added another piece to the puzzle, another layer to her understanding of how deeply systemic the problem ran. But it was the letters from workers themselves that affected her most profoundly. Written in shaky handwriting by people with minimal education, they described lives of grinding desperation. Fathers who watched their sons enter mines at age 6 because the family needed the meager wages. Mothers who lost multiple children to accidents that should have been prevented. Entire communities trapped in cycles of poverty, maintained by the very industries that employed them. The worst part, one letter read, is that we're supposed to be grateful. Grateful for dangerous work. Grateful for wages that barely feed us. Grateful that men like the Duke allow us to exist at all. But gratitude doesn't bring back my son. Doesn't heal my daughter's lungs. Doesn't change the fact that we're dying so rich men can get richer. Adeline copied that letter by hand, along with dozens of others, building her own archive of evidence. If Hawthorne thought exile would make her forget, he was catastrophically wrong. News from London arrived in irregular bursts, each report worse than the last. Her father had lost another major contract. The family townhouse was being quietly put up for sale. Henry had been withdrawn from his expensive school and enrolled in a lesser institution. The Carringtons were being systematically erased from polite society, and everyone knew who was orchestrating it. Your father writes that he's considering selling the shipping business entirely, Catherine reported one morning, reading from a letter delivered the previous night. Starting over in America, perhaps, where Hawthorne's influence doesn't reach. Running away, Adeline said bitterly. Surviving. There's no shame in survival, child. There is when you survive by pretending injustice doesn't exist, by letting powerful men crush anyone who challenges them. Adeline set down her teacup with enough force to rattle the saucer. My father thinks this is about business, about money and reputation, but it's bigger than that. It's about whether we accept a world where dukes can do whatever they want with no consequences, or whether we fight for something better. Noble sentiment. Will it feed your family when the money runs out? The question was cruel but fair. Adeline had no answer. Then, in early February, everything changed. Adeline was working in Catherine's library, copying testimony from a miner's widow, when Sarah burst in without knocking. The maid's face was flushed with excitement and alarm. Miss Adeline, there's a gentleman here to see you. He says it's urgent. Who is it? He wouldn't give his name, but miss, he arrived in a very fine carriage, with a crest on the door. Adeline's stomach dropped. A crest meant nobility, and there was only one nobleman who had any reason to seek her out in Bath. She found Duke Adrian Hawthorne standing in Catherine's drawing room, looking wildly out of place among the modest furnishings. He'd clearly traveled hard. His coat was dusty, his boots splattered with mud, and there was a tension in his posture that suggested urgency barely controlled. Miss Carrington. His voice was colder than the February wind outside. We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you, Your Grace. I believe you made your opinion of me quite clear in London. And I believe you made your accusations quite clear. Accusations that, it turns out, may have some basis in fact. He moved toward her, and Adeline instinctively stepped back. I've just returned from Durham, from the mines you were so concerned about. Would you like to know what I found? Adeline's heart hammered. What are you doing here? Answering your challenge, apparently, against my better judgment and every advisor I employ. Hawthorne pulled off his gloves with sharp, angry movements. I went north intending to prove you were a hysterical child spreading malicious gossip. Instead, I discovered that my overseers have been systematically violating every safety regulation and labor law in existence, that children, actual children, are working in conditions that would make a hardened soldier weep, that everything you said in that ballroom was not only true, but understated. The admission hit Adeline like a physical blow. You're saying I was right. I'm saying you were right about the conditions, not about me deliberately allowing them. His gray eyes flashed with something between anger and pain. I gave explicit orders years ago about minimum ages, safety requirements, working conditions. Those orders were ignored and the reports I received were falsified. I was lied to by men I trusted, and as a result, people suffered. People died. So you're the victim here? Adeline couldn't keep the scorn from her voice. The poor Duke who was misled by his subordinates? I'm the man responsible. There's a difference. Hawthorne's voice dropped to something quieter, more dangerous. Those were my mines, my operations, my name on the charters and the pay ledgers. Whether I knew the full truth or not, the responsibility is mine, and I intend to address it. How? By firing a few overseers and hiring new ones who will do the same thing? By implementing comprehensive reforms, real oversight, independent inspections, a complete restructuring of how my northern operations function. He pulled a document from his coat pocket and held it out. I've already begun drafting new policies. I wanted you to see them, to verify that I'm serious about change. Adeline stared at the offered papers like they might be poisoned. Why would you show me? Why would you care what I think? Because you were right. The admission seemed to cost him something, and because the people suffering in those mines deserve more than my pride. I may be arrogant, Miss Carrington, but I'm not a monster. When confronted with evidence of genuine harm, I'm capable of adapting. Unlike some people, I don't let righteousness blind me to practical reality. The insult stung, but Adeline took the papers. She scanned the proposed reforms, age restrictions, safety requirements, medical care provisions, shortened work hours. On paper, it looked comprehensive, revolutionary even. This would cost you a fortune, she said, implementing all of this. Yes, it would also save lives. I've decided the former is worth the latter. Hawthorne moved to the window, looking out at Catherine's snow-covered garden. I spent 3 days in Durham, Miss Carrington. I went into the mines myself, spoke to workers, families, physicians. I saw things that will haunt me for the rest of my life. And I realized something. You weren't trying to humiliate me at that ball. You were trying to save people I was too arrogant to see." The words hung in the air between them. Adeline didn't know how to respond. This wasn't the cold, cruel Duke from the ballroom. This was someone different, someone almost human. "Why are you really here?" she asked finally. "You could implement reforms without telling me, without ever seeing me again." Hawthorne turned back from the window, and something in his expression was almost vulnerable. "Because I owe you an apology. What I said at the Ashford ball was inexcusable. I was angry and humiliated, and I lashed out at you with deliberate cruelty. I questioned your character, your breeding, your worth as a person, and then I used my power to punish your entire family for your honesty. That wasn't leadership. That was tyranny." "Yes," Adeline agreed quietly. "It was. I can't undo the damage I've caused. Your father's business, your family's reputation, I destroyed those things out of spite and wounded pride. But I can stop the destruction from continuing. I can call off the pressure on your father's contracts. I can make it known that the Carringtons are no longer out of favor." He paused. "If you'll accept my apology." Adeline looked at the man before her, powerful, proud, and apparently sincere. She thought about her father's letters, about Henry being withdrawn from school, about her mother's anguish. This apology could end all of that, could restore everything Hawthorne had taken. But she also thought about Caleb Ward's documents, about the systematic evidence of corruption that went beyond just Durham, about the reform movement that needed this fight to continue. "I accept your apology," she said slowly, "but I need something more than just reforms in your minds." Hawthorne's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" "Help me build a case for nationwide industrial reform. Use your influence to push for enforceable regulations across all industries, not just your own holdings. Support the reform movement publicly. Prove that your commitment to change isn't just about salving your conscience. You're asking me to wage war against half the aristocracy and industrial establishment in England. I'm asking you to be the leader you claim to be, the man who puts responsibility above profit." Adeline stepped closer, meeting his eyes directly. "You said you owe me. This is how you pay that debt. Not with private reforms that you control, but with public advocacy that challenges the entire system." For a long moment, Hawthorne said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It was a real smile, not the polished social expression from the ballroom, and it transformed his entire face. "You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolish. I still haven't decided which." "Someone else said that to me recently," Adeline replied. "I'm beginning to think it might be both." "Fair enough." Hawthorne extended his hand. "I'll support your reform efforts, publicly, but I want something in return." "What?" "Return to London. Let me restore your family's position properly, and work with me on these reforms as a partner, not an adversary. We'll be more effective together than at each other's throats." Adeline looked at his extended hand, at the man who'd nearly destroyed her family, who was now offering alliance. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, being asked to jump and trust that someone would catch her. She shook his hand. "Partners, then. But Hawthorne, if you betray this agreement, if you use your power to silence reform again, I'll fight you with everything I have. I wouldn't expect anything less, Miss Carrington." He released her hand. "Though I'd prefer it if we could maintain some level of civility. Constant warfare is exhausting." "Then don't give me reason to fight you." He laughed, a genuine sound. "You truly are remarkable. Infuriating, but remarkable." Before Adeline could respond, Catherine burst into the room. Her face was white, her hands shaking as she held a telegram. "Adeline, it's your father. There's been an incident at one of his warehouses, a fire. He's been injured." The world tilted. "How badly?" "They don't know yet, but they're asking you to return to London immediately." Catherine's voice cracked. "Child, it might be serious." Hawthorne stepped forward. "My carriage is faster than public coaches. I can have you in London by tomorrow morning." Adeline barely heard him. All she could think about was her father's face, his tired eyes, the way he'd aged a decade in the days after the ball, the way he'd sent her away to protect his business, and now that business might have killed him. Miss Carrington, Hawthorne's voice cut through her panic. We leave in 10 minutes. Pack what you need. I'll handle the rest. She looked up at him, this man who'd been her enemy and was now offering help, and nodded. Whatever happened next, whatever consequences waited in London, she would face them. The war between them might have ended, but the real battle, against a system that crushed people like coal into diamonds, was just beginning. The journey to London passed in a blur of frozen roads and desperate silence. Hawthorne's carriage was indeed faster than any public coach, built for speed with a team of horses that seemed to understand the urgency. They stopped only to change horses, grabbing hard bread and cold meat at coaching inns before pushing onward through the winter night. Adeline sat across from the Duke, her hands clenched in her lap, watching darkness roll past the windows. Every mile felt like an eternity. Every hour brought new terrors her imagination conjured. Her father burned beyond recognition. Her mother collapsed with grief. Henry forced into adulthood too soon. He'll survive, Hawthorne said quietly, breaking hours of silence. Your father, he's a fighter. Men who build empires from nothing don't surrender easily. You don't know that. No, but I know men like Thomas Carrington. They're too stubborn to die from something as mundane as a warehouse fire. He paused. I also know this fire wasn't an accident. Adeline's head snapped up. What do you mean? 3 fires in my holdings in the past month. Now 1 in your father's warehouse. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidence. Hawthorne's expression was grim. Someone is sending a message, or trying to destroy evidence. Evidence of what? That's what I intend to find out. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Miss Carrington, when we reach London, you need to prepare yourself. This situation may be worse than a simple fire. There are forces at work here that neither of us fully understands yet. Stop being cryptic. If you know something, tell me. I know that several industrialists have been pressuring me to abandon my reform plans. I know that certain members of Parliament are furious about my public support for labor regulations. And I know that someone with significant resources has been systematically targeting anyone who threatens the current system. Hawthorne's voice was low, intense. Your father's fire may have nothing to do with you, or everything to do with what we discussed in Bath. Either way, we need to be careful. Adeline wanted to argue, to demand more concrete information, but exhaustion and fear had stripped away her combativeness. Instead, she turned back to the window and prayed, despite herself, that her father was still alive. They reached London just after dawn. The city was waking up, smoke rising from 1,000 chimneys, street vendors setting up their carts. Everything looked normal, mundane, utterly divorced from the panic hammering in Adeline's chest. The carriage pulled up to the Carrington townhouse, and Adeline didn't wait for the footman. She threw open the door and ran up the steps, her traveling clothes rumpled, her hair disheveled, not caring what she looked like. Her mother met her in the entrance hall. Margaret Carrington had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. Her hair was hastily pinned, her dress wrinkled, and her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. "Mama," Adeline breathed. "Where is he? How bad?" "Alive. Burned, but alive. The physician says he'll recover, though it will take time." Margaret's voice was hollow, mechanical. "He was in the warehouse when the fire started, trying to save the ledgers, the shipping records. The roof collapsed. If the workers hadn't pulled him out..." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. "Can I see him?" "He's sleeping. The physician gave him laudanum for the pain, but Adeline..." Her mother's voice cracked. "The warehouse is destroyed. Everything in it, all the records, the inventory, the contracts. Your father's entire business operation was in that building. We're ruined, completely ruined." Hawthorne appeared in the doorway behind Adeline, and Margaret's expression shifted from grief to fury. "You. This is your fault. You destroyed our reputation, pressured our business partners, and now Mama, stop." Adeline stepped between them. "The Duke brought me here. He's trying to help." "Help? He's done nothing but hurt us since the moment you challenged him, and now he shows up pretending to be our savior?" Margaret's laugh was bitter, broken. "We don't need his help. We need him to leave us alone." "Mrs. Carrington," Hawthorne said quietly, "I understand your anger, but this fire wasn't random, and I have resources that might help identify who's responsible. I know who's responsible. You are. You and your vendetta against my daughter. You wanted to destroy us, and you've succeeded. Congratulations, Your Grace. You've proven your power. Now get out of my house. Margaret, please, Adeline began. No, I've lost everything because you couldn't keep your mouth shut at that ball, because you had to play the hero and challenge a duke in front of all society. Well, you got your moment of righteousness. I hope it was worth it, because it's cost us our home, our business, and nearly cost your father his life. Margaret's voice rose, years of suppressed resentment pouring out. I wanted a better life for you, a chance to marry well, to be safe and secure. But you threw it all away for principles that don't pay bills or feed families, so forgive me if I don't want your duke standing in my entrance hall pretending to care. The words hit like hammer blows. Adeline felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Not here. Not now. Hawthorne bowed stiffly. I'll leave. But Miss Carrington, if you need anything at all, send word. He met her eyes briefly, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or just recognition of how badly everything had fractured. Then he was gone, and Adeline was left standing in the ruins of her family's life. She sat with her father for hours, watching him sleep. Thomas Carrington's face was bandaged on one side, his hands wrapped in white cloth that seeped yellow where the burns oozed. He looked small in the bed, diminished by pain and loss. When he finally woke, his eyes found her immediately. Adeline, his voice was rough, damaged by smoke. You came back. Of course I came back. You're my father. Stubborn. Like me. He tried to smile, winced instead. The warehouse? Gone. Mama says everything was destroyed. Thomas closed his eyes. Then we're finished. Can't rebuild without capital, and every bank in London will refuse me now. Hawthorne made sure of that. Papa, Hawthorne didn't what? Didn't systematically destroy my business? Didn't pressure every partner and investor I had? Didn't make an example of what happens when common people challenge nobility? Thomas's laugh turned into a cough that shook his whole body. When it passed, he looked at her with terrible clarity. I don't blame you, child. You were right about the mines, about the children, but being right doesn't pay debts or save businesses. That's the lesson I learned too late. There has to be a way. There isn't. I'm 53 years old, badly burned, and financially ruined. We'll lose this house within a month. Your mother will have to live with her sister in Cornwall. Henry will have to find work instead of finishing his education. And you, he paused, his eyes filling with tears. You'll have to marry whoever will take you now. Some clerk or shopkeeper who doesn't care about scandal. That's what we've come to. Adeline wanted to argue, to insist there were other options, but the words stuck in her throat. Because he was right. The comfortable life they'd known was gone, burned away in a single night. I'm sorry, Papa, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Don't be. You had courage to speak truth. That's worth something, even if it costs everything. Thomas squeezed her hand with his bandaged fingers. Just promise me you'll survive this. Whatever happens, find a way to survive. She promised, though she had no idea how to keep that promise. The next 3 days were a nightmare of practical disaster. Creditors arrived at the door demanding payment. The servants had to be dismissed for lack of wages. Furniture began disappearing as Margaret quietly sold pieces to raise cash. The Carrington Empire was being dismantled piece by piece, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Adeline threw herself into helping, cataloging what remained, dealing with bill collectors, trying to shield her mother from the worst of it. But at night, alone in her room, she felt the weight of her choices crushing her. Her mother was right. Her courage had destroyed them all. On the 4th day, Caleb Ward appeared at the door. I came as soon as I heard, he said, hat in hand, looking around at the half-empty entrance hall. About your father, about the fire. Adeline, I'm so sorry. Oh, you shouldn't be here. Association with us will only hurt your reform efforts. Let me worry about that. Ward followed her into the drawing room, one of the few rooms still fully furnished. I've been investigating the fire, talking to witnesses, examining what's left of the warehouse. Adeline, this wasn't an accident. She'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed still hit hard. You have proof?
Testimony from 3 different workers who saw men in the warehouse hours before the fire started. Men who didn't work there, who had no business being on the premises. One worker tried to challenge them and was threatened. Ward pulled out a notebook. I have descriptions, and more importantly, I have a connection. To what? To 2 other fires in the past month, one at Hawthorne's textile mill in Lancashire, another at a factory owned by reform-minded industrialist named Patterson. Same pattern. Mysterious men on the premises hours before, fires starting in multiple locations simultaneously, evidence of accelerant use. Adeline's breath caught. Someone is targeting reformers, or anyone perceived as a threat to the established industrial order. Your father's association with you, his daughter, who publicly challenged a duke, made him a target. Ward's expression was grim. There's more. I've heard rumors about Lord Victor Halstead. He's been organizing opposition to labor reform legislation, gathering support among conservatives who see any worker protections as government overreach. Halstead? Adeline searched her memory. He was at the Ashford ball. I remember seeing him talking to Hawthorne. They're old friends, or were, until Hawthorne announced his support for reforms. Now Halstead is leading the opposition, and he's not being subtle about it. He's publicly declared that industrialists who betray their class deserve whatever consequences come their way. That's practically a confession. It's political rhetoric without direct evidence linking him to the fires. It's just words. Ward closed his notebook. But I'm working on getting that evidence. In the meantime, you and your family need to be careful. If Halstead is behind this, he won't stop until everyone connected to the reform movement is silenced. After Ward left, Adeline sat in the drawing room and stared at the dying fire in the hearth. Everything was connected. The ball, the exile, the reforms, the fires. A web of consequence spreading out from one moment of courage that had seemed so simple at the time. And at the center of that web was Lord Victor Halstead. She was still sitting there when Henry burst in, his young face flushed with excitement. Addie, there's been news about Hawthorne's mill in Lancashire, the one that burned last month. They've recovered bodies from the wreckage. Adeline stood, cold dread washing over her. How many? 17 workers who were trapped when the building collapsed. But Addie, Henry's voice dropped. They're saying it wasn't an accident, that someone deliberately set the fire, and there's going to be an inquest, a public investigation into who's responsible. Who's saying this? Everyone. It's in all the newspapers. The Duke of Hawthorne himself is demanding a full investigation. He's offering a reward for information about who started the fire. Henry thrust a newspaper at her. This changes everything, doesn't it? If they can prove it was deliberate, if they can find who's responsible. Adeline scanned the article. Hawthorne had given a statement to the Times declaring that the Lancashire mill fire was an act of deliberate sabotage and murder, and that he would use every resource at my disposal to bring the perpetrators to justice. He was also, the article noted, increasing security at all his remaining facilities and urging other industrialists to do the same. It's a message, Adeline said quietly. He's telling whoever is behind this that he's not backing down. Do you think Father's fire is connected? I know it is. Adeline made a decision. Henry, I need you to do something for me. Go to the Duke of Hawthorne's townhouse and deliver a message. Tell him I need to meet with him immediately, privately. You want to meet with Hawthorne? After what he did to us? After what someone is doing to all of us? This is bigger than our family's feud, Henry. People are dying, and I think Hawthorne and I are 2 of the few people who understand what's really happening. Henry looked uncertain but nodded. I'll go now, but Addie, be careful. I don't trust him. Neither do I. But sometimes you have to work with people you don't trust to fight people who are worse. Hawthorne arrived that evening, entering through the servants' entrance to avoid attention. Adeline met him in her father's study, the only room in the house that still felt solid and permanent. You've heard about Lancashire, she said without preamble. I ordered the investigation. Hawthorne looked tired, lines of strain around his eyes she hadn't noticed before. 17 people dead because someone wanted to send a message. About reforms, about changing the system, about people like me who dare to suggest that worker safety matters. Caleb Ward thinks it's Lord Halstead. So do I. But thinking and proving are different things. Hawthorne moved to the window, watching the street. Halstead has been very careful.
Never directly involved, always working through intermediaries. But I've been tracking money flows, looking at connections between the various fires. There's a pattern. What kind of pattern? The same group of men appearing at multiple locations. Former soldiers, mostly. The kind who'll do anything for money and don't ask questions. They're being paid through a shell company that traces back to several investors, including Halstead. But the connections are deliberately obscured, legal enough that proving conspiracy will be nearly impossible. Adeline felt frustration building. So we know who's responsible but can't do anything about it? I didn't say that. I said proving it legally will be difficult. Hawthorne turned to face her. But there are other ways to fight. Public pressure, political maneuvering, making it too costly for Halstead to continue his campaign of violence. How? By making the reform movement too big to suppress. If it's just me and a few other industrialists, we can be targeted individually. But if we build a coalition, workers, reformers, progressive politicians, sympathetic journalists, then attacking one part means attacking the whole. Halstead can burn down buildings, but he can't burn down an idea whose time has come. It was the most passionate Adeline had ever heard him speak. This wasn't the cold duke from the ballroom, or even the apologetic nobleman from Bath. This was someone who actually cared, who saw the same injustices she did and wanted to fight them. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Your voice, your story. The woman who challenged a duke and paid the price but didn't surrender." Hawthorne stepped closer. "We're organizing a public meeting next week. Workers, reformers, anyone concerned about industrial conditions. I want you to speak. To tell people what you saw, what you know, why you challenged me in the first place. My credibility is destroyed. Your credibility is exactly why you need to speak. You're not a radical agitator or a political operative. You're a merchant's daughter who saw injustice and had the courage to name it publicly. People will listen to you in ways they won't listen to industrialists or politicians." Adeline thought about her mother's accusations, her father's ruined business, the comfortable life she'd destroyed with one moment of conscience. Then she thought about those letters from Durham, about children dying in darkness, about 17 workers burned alive in Lancashire. "I'll speak," she said. "But Hawthorne, if this is a trap, if you're using me somehow, it's not a trap. It's a war. And I'm asking you to fight beside me instead of against me." He extended his hand. "Partners?" She shook it. "Partners." The public meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at a workers' hall in East London. Adeline spent the days between preparing her remarks, going over evidence with Ward, and trying to ignore her mother's icy disapproval. "You're going to stand in front of a crowd of radicals and rabble-rousers and make another speech," Margaret said the night before the meeting. "Haven't you done enough damage?" "Mama, 17 people died in that fire. How many more have to die before we stop pretending everything is fine? And how many more times does our family have to suffer for your principles? Your father is barely recovered. We're losing our home. Henry had to leave school. But by all means, go make another grand gesture that accomplishes nothing except more suffering." The words cut deep because they carried a grain of truth. Adeline's courage had cost her family dearly. But surrender felt like betrayal, not just of the reform movement, but of everyone who'd suffered in silence because people like her chose comfort over justice. Tuesday arrived cold and clear. Adeline dressed in her simplest gown, pinned her hair severely back, and prepared to face whatever came next. The workers' hall was packed. Hundreds of people, laborers, craftsmen, factory workers, miners, filled the benches and stood along the walls. The air was thick with smoke and sweat, and the particular tension of people who'd been pushed to their limits and were looking for direction. Hawthorne was already there, standing near the platform with Ward and several other industrialists Adeline recognized from reform circles. He nodded when he saw her, the gesture both greeting and reassurance. Ward spoke first, laying out the case for industrial reform with calm precision. Then came testimony from workers about conditions in various industries, textile mills, coal mines, shipyards. Each story was worse than the last, painting a picture of systematic exploitation that made Adeline's stomach turn. Then Hawthorne stood to speak, and the crowd fell silent. "Many of you know me as the Duke of Hawthorne, as someone who profited from the very conditions we're here to condemn." His voice carried clearly through the hall.
And you'd be right. For years, I believed that my overseers were following my instructions, that the reports I received were accurate, that my operations were conducted ethically. I was wrong. Catastrophically, inexcusably wrong. He described his visit to Durham, his discovery of the truth, the reforms he was implementing. But more importantly, he took responsibility, didn't hide behind excuses or blame subordinates, just accepted that the suffering had happened under his authority, and he bore the weight of it. But acknowledgement isn't enough, he continued. We need systematic change, enforceable regulations, independent inspections, legal consequences for industrialists who prioritize profit over human life. That's why I'm supporting the Industrial Safety Act currently before Parliament. And that's why I'm asking you to support it too, to make your voices heard, to demand better. The crowd erupted in applause. Adeline watched faces light up with something that looked like hope. Like maybe, possibly, things could actually change. Then it was her turn. She climbed onto the platform, her legs shaking, her mouth dry. Hundreds of faces turned toward her, curious, skeptical, waiting to see if she was genuine or just another privileged woman playing at reform. My name is Adeline Carrington, she began, her voice steadier than she felt. And I'm the woman who challenged Duke Hawthorne at the Ashford Ball. The one who accused him of profiting from children's suffering. The one whose family has paid the price for that challenge ever since. She told them everything about the letters from Durham, about standing in that glittering ballroom and speaking truth to power, about the humiliation, the exile, the systematic destruction of her father's business, about discovering that the Duke's operations were even worse than she'd imagined. I was terrified when I spoke at that ball, she admitted. I knew there would be consequences, but I also knew that staying silent was worse than any consequence I might face, because silence is consent. And I could not consent to a world where children die in darkness so that dukes can live in light. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Some of you might think I'm brave. I'm not. I'm just someone who saw something wrong and couldn't look away. Who believed that truth was more important than comfort? And I was wrong about something. I thought challenging the Duke would make a difference, that public shame would force change. She paused. It didn't, not immediately, not in the way I expected. Instead, it started something bigger. A conversation. A movement. A recognition that we don't have to accept a system that treats human beings as disposable resources. She looked directly at Hawthorne. The Duke is here because he had the courage to listen, to investigate, to admit he was wrong, and commit to being better. That's rare in powerful people, and it's why I believe this movement can succeed. Because it's not about punishing industrialists or destroying businesses. It's about recognizing that economic success and human dignity aren't mutually exclusive. Adeline described the reforms Hawthorne was implementing, the legislation being proposed, the coalition they were building. Then she issued a challenge. But we need your help, your voices, your willingness to stand up and demand better. Change doesn't come from a few courageous individuals. It comes from collective action, from people deciding they've had enough and refusing to accept less than they deserve. She gripped the podium. So I'm asking you, all of you, to join us. Write to your members of parliament, organize in your workplaces, tell your stories publicly, make it impossible for people in power to ignore you. Because that's the only way this ends, when silence becomes impossible and justice becomes inevitable. The applause started slowly, then built like a wave. People were standing, cheering, and Adeline felt something shift. This was bigger than her family's troubles, bigger than one duke's reforms. This was the beginning of real change. Then the windows exploded inward in a spray of glass and flame. Adeline hit the floor as fire blossomed across the platform. Someone was screaming. Smoke filled the hall. Through the chaos, she saw men in dark clothes throwing bottles through the broken windows, bottles stuffed with burning rags that erupted into pools of flame when they hit the ground. Fire! Everyone out! Hawthorne's voice cut through the panic. He was dragging people toward the exits, his coat smoldering where embers had caught. Adeline stumbled to her feet, coughing on smoke. The hall was emptying in panicked chaos as people trampled toward the doors. But not everyone was making it. An older man had fallen near the platform, trapped under an overturned bench. A young woman stood frozen, too terrified to move. Adeline grabbed the woman, shook her. Move! Now!
She shoved her toward the nearest exit, then turned back for the man. The smoke was thicker now, black and choking. She could barely see. Her lungs burned, but she reached the fallen man, tried to lift the bench pinning him. "Help me!" she screamed. "Someone help!" Strong hands appeared beside hers. Ward, his face blackened by soot, lifted the bench enough for her to pull the man free. Together they dragged him toward the exit as the ceiling began to collapse behind them. They burst into the street, gasping for clean air. The workers' hall was engulfed now, flames shooting from every window. People were scattered across the street, coughing, crying, checking for injuries. Adeline counted bodies frantically. Hawthorne was there, directing people away from the burning building. Ward beside her. But so many faces she didn't recognize. How many had made it out? How many were still inside? Then she saw him, across the street, watching from the shadows of an alley. Lord Victor Halstead, his expression calm and satisfied as he watched the building burn. Their eyes met for one terrible moment. He smiled, actually smiled, and tipped his hat to her. Then he turned and disappeared into the darkness. "That was Halstead," she gasped, grabbing Hawthorne's arm. "I saw him. He was watching. He did this." "I know." Hawthorne's voice was grim. "And now he's made his biggest mistake." Fire bells clanged in the distance. People were still streaming out of nearby buildings, alarmed by the blaze, and Adeline stood in the street, covered in soot and blood, watching another building burn, and understood with terrible clarity that this war was far from over. It was, in fact, just beginning. The fire brigade arrived within minutes, but by then the workers' hall was beyond saving. Adeline watched the building collapse inward, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky like dying stars. Around her, survivors huddled in shocked clusters, some nursing burns, others simply staring at the destruction with hollow eyes. "We need to get you away from here," Hawthorne said, his hand firm on her elbow. His face was streaked with soot, his expensive coat ruined, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "Halstead saw you recognize him. That makes you a target." "I'm already a target. We all are." Adeline pulled away, moving among the survivors. "How many didn't make it out?" "The hall manager says 3 workers are unaccounted for. They were in the back when the bottles came through the windows." Ward appeared beside them, his voice rough from smoke. "The fire brigade is searching now, but..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Adeline felt rage building in her chest, hot and clean. 3 more people dead. 17 in Lancashire. Her father nearly killed in his warehouse. All because men like Halstead believed their wealth gave them the right to destroy anyone who threatened their power. "We need proof," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Not just seeing him in an alley. Actual evidence linking Halstead to the fires. Something that can't be dismissed or explained away." "Agreed." Hawthorne pulled her and Ward away from the crowd, into the shadows of a nearby building. "I've been investigating Halstead's finances for weeks. He's been paying substantial sums to a security company, Barrow and Sons, former military men who specialize in what they call industrial protection. I believe they're the ones actually setting the fires." "Can you prove it?" Ward asked. "Not yet. The payments are structured to look legitimate. Security consultations, property assessments, that sort of thing. But the timing is suspicious. Large payments right before each fire, followed by additional payments afterward, like performance bonuses." Adeline's mind raced. If we could intercept one of these men, get them to confess who hired them, they're professionals. They won't talk. Hawthorne's expression was grim. But their employer might. Barrow himself. If we could prove he's ordering these attacks, we could trace the chain back to Halstead. And how do we do that? Simply ask him to confess his crimes over tea? Not ask. Force. Hawthorne's voice dropped to something dangerous. "I have resources, Miss Carrington. Money, influence, people who owe me favors. If Barrow is behind tonight's attack, his men will still be in London, probably celebrating their success in some East End pub. We find them, we find Barrow, and we get the truth." Ward looked alarmed. "You're talking about vigilante justice, kidnapping, coercion? I'm talking about stopping a murderer before more people die." Hawthorne turned to Adeline. "But I won't do this without your agreement. You're the one who started this fight. You get to decide how we finish it." Adeline thought of those 3 workers still missing in the rubble, thought of 17 burned bodies in Lancashire, thought of her father's bandaged hands and her mother's broken spirit. Legal methods had failed. The system protected men like Halstead because the system was designed by men like Halstead. "Find them," she said. "Do whatever it takes." Hawthorne nodded once, then turned to Ward. "I need you to gather the survivors. Get statements about what happened here tonight. Make sure journalists hear about this attack. I want it in every newspaper by morning." "And you?" "I'm going hunting." He disappeared into the darkness, moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how to navigate London's dangerous underbelly. Adeline watched him go, then turned her attention to the survivors who needed help. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Ward organized the witnesses, taking careful notes about who saw what. Adeline helped the injured to a nearby hospital, using what little money she had to ensure they received treatment. By the time the sun rose, she was exhausted, filthy, and more determined than ever. She returned to her family's townhouse as dawn painted the London sky in shades of pink and gold. Her mother was waiting in the entrance hall, her face pale with fury. "Do you have any idea what time it is? Where you've been?" Margaret's voice shook. "I heard about the fire, the attack. Adeline, you could have been killed. But I wasn't. This time. What about next time? What about when they come for you directly instead of burning buildings around you?" Her mother grabbed her shoulders. "Please, I'm begging you. Stop this. Withdraw from this reform movement before it destroys what's left of our family." "Mama, people died tonight. 3 workers who came to that meeting because they believed change was possible. I can't stop. Not while men like Halstead are willing to murder anyone who challenges them." "Then you're a fool. A brave fool, perhaps, but a fool nonetheless." Margaret released her, stepping back. "Your father is asking for you. He heard about the fire. It nearly killed him, the shock of it." Guilt twisted in Adeline's stomach. She climbed the stairs to her father's room, preparing for another confrontation. Thomas Carrington was sitting up in bed, his bandages freshly changed. He looked better than he had days ago, but still frighteningly fragile. "Adeline," his voice was stronger though. "Tell me what happened, all of it." She did. Described the meeting, the speeches, the moment the windows exploded, Hawthorne's courage in evacuating people, her glimpse of Halstead watching from the shadows. When she finished, her father was silent for a long moment. "Halstead," he said finally. "Victor Halstead. I should have seen it sooner." "What do you mean?" "He approached me, months ago before the Ashford ball. Offered to invest in my shipping business. Very generous terms, too generous, really. I turned him down because something felt wrong about it. The way he talked about workers, about efficiency, about maximizing profit regardless of human cost. It made my skin crawl." Thomas shifted in bed, wincing. 2 weeks later, my warehouse burned. I thought it was coincidence at the time. Now, I wonder if it was punishment for refusing his partnership. Adeline's breath caught. "Papa, you need to tell Hawthorne this. It's evidence of a pattern. Halstead targeting anyone who won't cooperate with his vision of industry. Evidence a duke's word might make credible. Evidence from a ruined merchant? Less convincing." But Thomas reached for paper and pen on his bedside table. "I'll write it down anyway. Everything Halstead said, every detail I remember. If it helps build a case against him, so be it. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just promise me you'll be careful. Men like Halstead don't surrender easily. They'll burn the world down rather than admit defeat." His eyes met hers. "I taught you to fight for what's right. I'm proud of that. But I also want you to survive long enough to see victory." "I will, Papa. I promise." She left him writing his statement and found Henry waiting in the hallway. Her brother had grown taller in the weeks she'd been away, his face losing its boyish softness. "Addie, I want to help," he said without preamble. "With the investigation, with stopping Halstead. I'm not a child anymore. I should be doing something." "Henry, don't tell me I'm too young or it's too dangerous. Father almost died. You almost died. Our family is being destroyed. I have a right to fight back." Adeline studied her brother's determined expression and saw herself reflected there. The same stubborn courage, the same refusal to accept injustice. She could protect him, send him away to safety. or she could trust him to make his own choices. "All right," she said, "but you follow my instructions exactly. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Agreed?" "Agreed." Henry's grin was fierce. "What do you need me to do?" "Go to the Times office. Ask for a journalist named Robert Fletcher. He's sympathetic to reform causes. Tell him I have testimony from witnesses to last night's attack, including identification of Lord Halstead at the scene. Tell him the Duke of Hawthorne will provide additional evidence within 48 hours. Can you remember all that?" "Word for word." Henry was already moving toward the stairs. "I won't let you down, Addie." She watched him go and prayed she wasn't making a terrible mistake. Hawthorne appeared at the townhouse that afternoon, arriving discreetly through the servants' entrance. He looked like he hadn't slept, his clothes rumpled, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. But there was also something triumphant in his expression. "We found them," he said without preamble. "Barrow's men. They were exactly where I thought they'd be, celebrating in a tavern near the docks. Very stupid of them, really. Professional arsonists should know better than to draw attention immediately after a job." "What did you do?" "Persuaded them to have a conversation in a more private location. The persuasion was expensive but effective." Hawthorne pulled folded papers from his coat. "Signed confessions from 2 of Barrow's employees. They describe receiving orders to firebomb the workers' hall, receiving payment through Barrow, even kept some of the original instruction letters." Adeline grabbed the documents, scanning them quickly. The handwriting was rough but clear. The details explicit. Dates, amounts, specific instructions about targeting the meeting. "This is incredible. This could—" "Wait! There's more!" Hawthorne's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Barrow himself was at the docks this morning, preparing to leave England. Probably realized that burning a public meeting was too high profile, that investigators would come looking. My people intercepted him before he could board his ship." "Where is he now?" "Somewhere secure, having a very thorough conversation about his business practices." Hawthorne met her eyes. "He's confirmed that Halstead hired him, not just for last night, but for all the fires. Lancashire, your father's warehouse, Patterson's factory. Halstead has been waging a systematic campaign of terror against anyone supporting industrial reform. And Barrow has documentation, correspondence, payment records, everything we need to prove Halstead's guilt." The magnitude of it hit Adeline like a wave. They had him. Actually had him. Not just suspicion or circumstantial evidence, but proof that could bring down one of England's most powerful lords. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we make a choice." Hawthorne moved to the window, looking out at the street. "We can turn this evidence over to the authorities. Let the legal system handle it. Halstead will be arrested, tried, probably convicted. But it will take months, maybe years. During that time, he'll use every connection he has to discredit witnesses, suppress evidence, delay justice. And even if he's eventually convicted, the scandal might destroy the reform movement entirely. People will remember the violence and chaos, not the cause we're fighting for." "What's the alternative?" "Private justice. I confront Halstead directly, show him the evidence, make it clear that his choice is between public disgrace and quiet exile. He leaves England, abandons his opposition to reform, and we avoid the spectacle of a trial that might hurt more than it helps." Adeline felt torn. The legal path was right, proper, how civilized society was supposed to function. But Hawthorne was right about the risks. A long public trial would become a circus. Halstead's allies would use it to attack the entire reform movement. Justice delayed might be justice denied. "There's a third option," she said slowly. "We use the evidence to force Halstead's cooperation, make him publicly support reform legislation, turn him into an advocate for the very cause he's been trying to destroy." Hawthorne turned from the window, interest sharpening his features. "Explain." "Halstead cares about his reputation above all else. Being arrested would destroy that. Exile would mean losing his power and influence. But if we offer him a way to save face, to be seen as someone who had a change of heart rather than a criminal caught red-handed, he might take it." Adeline's mind was racing now, seeing the possibilities. "We have him over a barrel. We can dictate terms. Make him use his influence to push the Industrial Safety Act through Parliament. Make him finance worker protection programs. Turn his resources toward good instead of destruction. You want to blackmail him into becoming a reformer? I want to use his guilt to create lasting change. Putting Halstead in prison might feel satisfying, but it doesn't reform a single factory or save a single worker. Forcing him to fund and support the very movement he tried to destroy? That's real justice. Hawthorne considered this, a slow smile spreading across his face. You're absolutely ruthless when you want to be. I'm beginning to understand why you terrified me at that ball. I didn't terrify you, I embarrassed you. Same thing for a duke. He moved to the desk, spreading out Barrow's documents. All right, we try it your way first. I'll arrange a meeting with Halstead. Private, somewhere he can't easily escape or call for help. We present the evidence and our terms. If he refuses, we go to the authorities. When? Tonight, before he realizes we have this evidence and tries to flee like Barrow did. Hawthorne looked at her seriously. But Adeline, if we do this, we're crossing a line. Using blackmail to force political action, even for good causes, sets a dangerous precedent. Are you comfortable with that? She thought about 3 workers buried in rubble, 17 burned alive in Lancashire, children dying in coal mines while noblemen danced at balls. Sometimes the moral high ground was a luxury people couldn't afford. I'm comfortable with doing whatever it takes to save lives, she said. Ethics are important, but not more important than preventing murder. Spoken like a true revolutionary, Hawthorne gathered the documents. I'll send word when the meeting is arranged. In the meantime, lay low. If Halstead realizes we're moving against him, he might do something desperate. He left through the same servant's entrance he'd used to arrive, disappearing into the London afternoon like smoke. Adeline spent the rest of the day preparing. She helped her father finish his written statement about Halstead's attempted business partnership. She checked on Henry, who'd successfully delivered her message to Robert Fletcher at the Times. She even tried to explain to her mother what was happening, though Margaret seemed too exhausted by constant crisis to fully absorb it. As evening fell, a messenger arrived with a note from Hawthorne. Simple, direct, 10 o'clock. The Brentwood Club. Come armed with courage. The Brentwood Club was one of London's most exclusive establishments, a place where the highest levels of society met to conduct business away from public scrutiny. Adeline had never been inside, of course. Women weren't permitted except on special occasions, and merchants' daughters weren't permitted at all. But tonight, Hawthorne met her at a side entrance used by servants. He changed into formal evening clothes that made him look every inch the powerful Duke. Beside him, looking merely presentable in her dark traveling dress, Adeline felt the gulf between their social positions more keenly than ever. Halstead is in the private dining room upstairs, Hawthorne said quietly. I told him we needed to discuss a business proposition. He's suspicious but curious. He doesn't know about Barrow's confession yet. Is he alone? With 2 associates, Lords Pemberton and Crawford, both conservative industrialists who've been opposing reform legislation. Hawthorne's jaw tightened. Having witnesses might work in our favor. Harder for Halstead to deny what happens when others are present. They climbed a narrow servants' staircase, emerging into a carpeted hallway lined with paintings of previous club members. All men, all aristocrats, all looking down with expressions of inherited superiority. Adeline lifted her chin and walked past them like she belonged. The private dining room was elegantly appointed, all dark wood and leather, with a fire crackling in a massive hearth. 3 men sat at a mahogany table set with crystal and silver. Lord Victor Halstead occupied the head position, looking supremely comfortable in his domain. He was handsome in the way many aristocrats were, good bone structure inherited through careful breeding, expensive tailoring hiding any physical flaws. But his eyes were cold, calculating, and when he saw Adeline, they narrowed with barely concealed contempt. Hawthorne, what is the meaning of this? Halstead's voice was smooth, cultured. You said business. I didn't realize you meant bringing your pet reformer to our meeting. Miss Carrington is here because this concerns her directly, Hawthorne replied, his voice equally smooth. Along with 17 dead workers in Lancashire, 3 more from last night's fire, and dozens of other victims of industrial violence. Pemberton, a portly man in his 60s, shifted uncomfortably. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Hawthorne pulled Barrow's documents from his coat and spread them on the table.
These are signed confessions from the men who set fire to the workers' hall last night. They identify their employer, a security consultant named Barrow, who in turn identifies his client, Lord Victor Halstead. Silence crashed through the room. Crawford, younger than Pemberton but equally conservative, leaned forward to examine the documents. Halstead didn't move, his expression perfectly controlled. "Anyone can forge documents," he said calmly. "Sign false confessions. This proves nothing." "Barrow is currently in protective custody," Hawthorne continued, "along with his business records showing regular payments from your accounts. Payment schedules that align perfectly with every major fire-targeting reform advocates over the past 6 months. Lancashire. Patterson's factory. The Carrington warehouse. Last night's haul. All connected. All traced back to you." Pemberton stood abruptly. "Victor, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't—" "Sit down, William." Halstead's voice cracked like a whip. "You're being manipulated. Can't you see what Hawthorne is doing? He's trying to eliminate political opposition by manufacturing scandal. These confessions are lies. Barrow is lying to save himself from prosecution." "Is he lying about the letters you sent him?" Adeline spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through the tension. "The ones with explicit instructions about targeting the workers' meeting? About making sure I was there when it happened?" She hadn't known about that detail until this moment, but she saw Halstead's eyes flicker, just for a second, and knew she'd guessed correctly. "You wanted me dead," she continued, stepping closer to the table. "Not just discredited or frightened. Dead. Because I challenged your entire worldview, proved that ordinary people could stand up to lords and dukes and survive. You couldn't allow that example to continue existing." "You're delusional," Halstead said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Crawford was reading through the documents now, his face growing pale. "Victor, some of these dates, I remember you mentioning meetings with security consultants around these times. You said it was about protecting your properties from worker agitation." "Which it was. You hired men to burn down buildings with people inside." Crawford stood, knocking his chair backward. 17 workers died in Lancashire. Do you understand what you've done? The scandal this will cause?" "There will be no scandal." Halstead's mask finally cracked, revealing the desperate calculation beneath. "Because none of this evidence is admissible. Confessions obtained under duress, and I'm certain Hawthorne's persuasion was far from gentle. Circumstantial connections between payments and fires. It's all worthless in court." "Perhaps," Hawthorne acknowledged, "but remarkably effective in the court of public opinion. Imagine tomorrow's newspapers reporting that Lord Victor Halstead is under investigation for multiple counts of arson and murder, that the Duke of Hawthorne has personally accused him of industrial terrorism, that witnesses can place him at the scene of last night's attack. True or false, legal or not, your reputation would be destroyed by sunset. You wouldn't dare. It would implicate the entire conservative faction, make enemies of everyone who opposes your reform nonsense." "I'm willing to take that risk." Hawthorne's voice was ice. "Are you?" Adeline watched Halstead calculate, saw him weighing his options. He could fight, risk everything on a legal battle that might clear him but would definitely destroy his reputation in the process. He could flee, abandon England and everything he'd built here, or he could negotiate. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Your complete and public support for the Industrial Safety Act currently before Parliament," Adeline said, taking control of the negotiation. "Active lobbying among your conservative allies, financial contributions to worker protection programs, and immediate cessation of any opposition to reform efforts. You're insane. I'd be betraying everything I believe. You'd be saving your life and freedom. Frankly, it's more mercy than you deserve." Her voice hardened. 17 people are dead because of you, Halstead. 3 more from last night. My father nearly burned alive. Workers' families destroyed. And you're worried about betraying your principles? You have no principles. Just greed and fear of change. Halstead's face flushed with rage. "How dare you?" "She dares because she's right," Pemberton interrupted, his voice shaking. "Victor, if this is true, if you really did these things, then you're beyond redemption. The only question is whether you'll face justice publicly or privately, and I, for one, would prefer privately. The scandal would hurt all of us." "Agreed," Crawford added quietly. "Support the reform legislation
Make amends however you can, and pray that history remembers you as someone who changed rather than a monster who murdered for profit." Halstead looked between them, seeing his allies abandon him in real time. Then his eyes fell on the documents again, on Barrow's meticulous records of their conspiracy. "If I agree to your terms," he said slowly, "I want complete immunity from prosecution. No criminal charges, no civil suits, no public accusations. This evidence disappears forever." "No." Adeline's response was immediate. "The evidence stays secure but accessible. If you violate our agreement, if you ever again use violence or intimidation to oppose reform, it goes to every newspaper and prosecutor in England. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison. That's the deal. Take it, or we walk out and let the scandal begin." For a long moment, Halstead stared at her. Then slowly he nodded. "I'll need time to prepare my allies, to frame my support for reform in ways they'll accept." "You have 1 week," Hawthorne said. "Then you make a public statement supporting the Industrial Safety Act. After that, we'll discuss your financial contributions to worker programs." "And if I refuse? If I call your bluff? Then tomorrow morning, you'll wake up to find your name in every newspaper in England, and by tomorrow night, you'll be in custody facing murder charges." Hawthorne gathered the documents. "Choose carefully, Halstead, because this is the only mercy you'll receive." They left him sitting at the table, his face ashen, his power crumbling around him. Pemberton and Crawford followed them out, both looking shaken. "Hawthorne, what you've done tonight," Pemberton began. "What I've done is stopped a murderer and secured support for necessary legislation. If you have a problem with that, you're welcome to join Halstead in disgrace." Pemberton's mouth snapped shut. Both lords hurried away, clearly eager to distance themselves from the scandal. Adeline and Hawthorne stood in the hallway, the weight of what they'd accomplished settling over them. "Do you think he'll honor the agreement?" she asked. "He'll have to. We hold too much over him. And Pemberton and Crawford witnessed everything. They'll make sure he complies rather than risk their own reputations." Hawthorne looked at her with something approaching wonder. "You were magnificent in there. Absolutely terrifying. I learned from the best. You destroyed my family quite thoroughly. Taught me exactly how power works. And you're using those lessons to change the world. I'm not sure whether to be proud or worried." He smiled, then grew serious. "This isn't over, you realize. Even with Halstead's support, the Industrial Safety Act faces opposition. And there will be others like him who will fight reform in different ways." "I know, but this is a start. We've proven that accountability is possible, that even the most powerful can't commit atrocities with impunity." Adeline felt exhaustion washing over her, but also something like hope. "People died because of Halstead. We can't bring them back, but we can make sure their deaths meant something, that they led to change." "We will, together." Hawthorne extended his arm. "May I escort you home, Miss Carrington? It's late, and the streets aren't safe." She took his arm, and they walked out into the London night. Above them, stars emerged between clouds, and somewhere in the distance, church bells marked the hour. 3 days later, Lord Victor Halstead issued a public statement supporting comprehensive industrial safety legislation. He cited recent tragedies, carefully avoiding any admission of responsibility, and called on his fellow lords to recognize our moral obligation to those who labor in our service. The statement was calculated, self-serving, and exactly what they'd demanded. The newspapers erupted. The Times ran a front-page article about the remarkable conversion of Lord Halstead and his unexpected alliance with reform advocates. Other publications speculated about what had prompted the change, but without evidence of criminal activity, they could only wonder. Meanwhile, Caleb Ward's testimony from the workers' hall attack reached sympathetic members of Parliament. The story of 17 deaths in Lancashire, combined with Halstead's sudden support, created momentum for the Industrial Safety Act that had previously seemed impossible. Adeline watched it all unfold from her family's townhouse, which somehow remained theirs despite the financial disaster. Hawthorne had quietly intervened with creditors, using his influence to grant extensions and restructure debts. Thomas Carrington's business was far from recovered, but it had stopped its death spiral. "I still don't trust him," Margaret said, watching from the window as Hawthorne's carriage pulled up outside. "The Duke. He destroyed us once. What's to stop him from doing it again?" "Nothing except his word," Adeline admitted. "But I think he's changed. Not completely, not into someone different, but enough to matter. Hawthorne had come to discuss the next phase of reform efforts. As Adeline descended the stairs to meet him, she caught sight of herself in the entrance hall mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the frightened girl who'd challenged a duke at a ball months ago. This woman had survived exile, fire, and conspiracy. Had faced down a murderer and won. She smiled at her reflection, then went to greet her unlikely ally. The real work was just beginning. Hawthorne stood in the Carrington entrance hall with an expression Adeline had never seen on him before, something that looked almost like nervousness. He held a leather folder under one arm and kept adjusting his gloves with the other hand, a gesture so uncharacteristically fidgety that it made her smile. "Your Grace," she greeted him, "you look like a man about to face execution." "Worse. I'm about to ask for help." He glanced toward the drawing room where voices drifted out. "Is your father well enough for visitors?" "He's improving daily. The burns are healing, though he'll carry the scars." Adeline led him down the hallway. "What kind of help do you need from a ruined merchant?" "The kind only Thomas Carrington can provide. Business acumen without aristocratic bias, and a perspective I've been sorely lacking." Hawthorne paused before the drawing room door. "I meant what I said about making amends, Adeline. Not just to you, but to everyone I've harmed through arrogance and willful ignorance. But I can't do it alone." They entered to find Thomas Carrington sitting in a high-backed chair by the fire, his bandaged hands resting on the arms. He looked better than he had a week ago, color returning to his face, though the burns on his left side would mark him permanently. Margaret sat nearby with needlework, and Henry was reading by the window. "Your Grace." Thomas's tone was neutral, neither welcoming nor hostile. "My daughter said you wished to discuss business." Among other things, Hawthorne set his folder on the side table. "Mr. Carrington, I owe you an apology. I used my power to systematically destroy your livelihood because your daughter challenged my pride. It was petty, cruel, and beneath the responsibilities I claim to uphold. I'm sorry." Silence filled the room. Margaret's needle stopped mid-stitch. Henry's book lowered. Thomas simply stared at the Duke with an expression of profound surprise. "I don't believe I've ever heard a nobleman apologize to a merchant before," Thomas said finally. "Certainly not a Duke apologizing to someone he nearly bankrupted." "Then it's past time the practice started." Hawthorne moved to the fireplace. "I've drafted a proposal to rebuild your shipping business. Investment capital provided by my estate, partnership structure that gives you full operational control, and contracts with my various holdings to provide guaranteed revenue while you reestablish yourself." "Why?" The question came from Margaret, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Why would you help us after everything that's happened?" "Because I was wrong. Because your daughter was right. And because the world I want to build, one where power comes with responsibility and accountability, requires me to repair the damage my old worldview caused." Hawthorne looked at each of them in turn. "I can't undo what I did, can't erase the pain or loss. But I can try to make things right going forward, if you'll allow me." Thomas exchanged a long look with his wife. Some silent conversation passed between them, years of marriage allowing communication beyond words. Finally, Margaret nodded almost imperceptibly. "I'd like to see this proposal," Thomas said carefully, "though I make no promises about accepting it." "That's all I ask." Hawthorne retrieved his folder, but before he could open it, the door burst open and Caleb Ward rushed in, his face flushed with excitement. "Adeline! The vote happened early. Parliament just passed the Industrial Safety Act. It passed!" The room erupted. Adeline felt her legs go weak, had to grab the back of a chair for support. After months of fighting, of fire and exile and death, they'd actually won. "What was the margin?" Hawthorne demanded. "Narrow, 43 votes. But Halstead's support made the difference. He brought enough conservative lords with him to tip the balance." Ward was practically bouncing. "It's not perfect. They stripped out some enforcement provisions, weakened the inspection requirements, but it's real. Actual legal protections for workers, age restrictions on child labor, mandatory safety standards. It's everything we've been fighting for." "Not everything," Adeline said quietly. "But it's a beginning. A beginning we built together." Hawthorne extended his hand to Ward. "Your documentation made the case. Your testimony swayed the moderate votes. This victory belongs to you as much as anyone." Ward shook his hand, then surprised everyone by pulling Adeline into a tight embrace. "You started this. That moment at the Ashford ball when you challenged a duke in front of all society, that's when people started believing change was possible. You were the spark." Adeline felt tears burning behind her eyes. She thought of those letters from Durham, of the boy named Thomas crushed at 7 years old, of 17 workers burned in Lancashire. The act wouldn't bring them back, but it might save others like them. "We need to celebrate," Henry declared, setting down his book. "Properly celebrate. This is history." "History that costs lives," Adeline reminded him gently. "We should acknowledge that even as we celebrate, then we celebrate those lives by honoring what their sacrifice achieved." Thomas struggled to his feet, waving away Margaret's concerned protests. "A toast? Someone find champagne that hasn't been sold to pay creditors." They gathered around the fire, duke and merchant, reformer and reluctant revolutionary, family bound by crisis and courage. Henry produced a bottle he'd apparently been hiding for a special occasion. Glasses were filled, including small amounts for Margaret, despite her protests that ladies shouldn't drink spirits in the afternoon. Thomas raised his glass, his bandaged hand shaking slightly. "To the workers who suffered, to the voices that refused to stay silent, and to my daughter, who proved that courage matters more than consequence." "To change," Ward added. "To accountability," Hawthorne said, looking at Adeline. "To survival," Margaret said quietly, surprising them all. "And to my stubborn, impossible daughter who somehow made this madness mean something." They drank, and for a moment the world felt balanced. Not perfect, not healed, but moving in the right direction. The celebration was interrupted by another visitor. The butler announced Lord Pemberton with obvious reluctance. Aristocracy still unsettled him even after months of the Carringtons' reduced circumstances. Pemberton entered looking profoundly uncomfortable, his round face flushed. "Forgive the intrusion. I heard about the vote and wanted to speak with Hawthorne. Didn't realize you had company." "We're celebrating," Hawthorne said coolly. "Would you like to join us, or have you come to complain about reform legislation passing?" "Neither. I came to—" Pemberton stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I came to thank you and to apologize." The room went silent again. Pemberton looked at Adeline, his expression pained. "Miss Carrington, I was at the Ashford ball that night. I heard what you said to Hawthorne, and I did nothing. Worse, I laughed when he humiliated you, told myself you deserved it for speaking out of turn." He paused, gathering courage. "Then I saw what Halstead was willing to do to silence reform, the fires, the deaths, the systematic terror. And I realized that staying silent makes me complicit, that not challenging injustice is its own form of evil." "Better late than never, I suppose," Margaret said with surprising gentleness, "though lives might have been saved if you'd found your courage sooner." "I know, and I'll carry that knowledge the rest of my days." Pemberton turned back to Hawthorne. "I wanted you to know that I've been speaking with other conservative lords. Many of them are disturbed by what Halstead did, worried that opposing reform has become associated with violence and criminality. There's an opportunity here to build a coalition that supports reasonable worker protections while maintaining industrial growth. If you're interested." Hawthorne considered this carefully. "Reasonable protections. Define reasonable." "The Industrial Safety Act is passed. Nothing more radical, but nothing less either. Actual enforcement rather than empty promises. And willingness to revisit the legislation in 5 years to strengthen what's working and revise what isn't." Pemberton's voice grew firmer. "We can't go back to the old ways, but we also can't let fear of change paralyze progress. There's a middle path if we're brave enough to walk it. And you think your conservative colleagues will follow you down this path? Some will, others won't. But after Halstead's disgrace, many are looking for ways to distance themselves from his extremism. Supporting worker safety is suddenly politically advantageous." Pemberton smiled wryly. "Self-interest and morality occasionally align. We should capitalize on that when it happens." Ward laughed. "The most honest thing I've ever heard from an aristocrat. Welcome to the reform movement, Lord Pemberton. We'll take allies wherever we find them." even reluctant ones who should have acted sooner? Especially those. Guilt is an excellent motivator for sustained effort. They talked strategy for another hour, which lords might be persuaded, what compromises might be acceptable, how to frame worker protections as economically beneficial rather than radical politics. Adeline watched Hawthorne lead the discussion with quiet authority, and she marveled at the transformation. This wasn't the cold duke from the ballroom. This was someone who'd learned to wield power with wisdom rather than cruelty. When Pemberton finally left, promising to organize a meeting of moderate lords, Hawthorne turned to Adeline with an expression of cautious hope. It's really happening, real change, not just symbolic gestures. 5 months ago, I would have dismissed this as impossible. 5 months ago, you would have been leading the opposition, Adeline pointed out. What changed? I saw truth I'd been avoiding, saw the cost of my willful ignorance. He paused, choosing words carefully. You forced me to look at my own reflection and face what I'd become. That's a gift, even if it felt like a curse at the time. Some gift. I nearly destroyed both our lives in the process. But you didn't. We're both still here, both still fighting, and now we're fighting together instead of against each other. That has to count for something. Before Adeline could respond, Margaret stood abruptly. Your Grace, might I have a word, privately? Hawthorne looked startled, but nodded. They stepped into the hallway, leaving Adeline to wonder what her mother was planning. She tried not to imagine the worst. When they returned 10 minutes later, Margaret's expression was unreadable, but Hawthorne looked oddly shaken. What did you say to him? Adeline demanded once Hawthorne had left. I asked him what his intentions were toward you, long term. Margaret settled back into her chair, picking up her needlework. He gave a very interesting answer. Mama, I'm not telling you what he said, but I will say that the Duke is a more honorable man than I gave him credit for, even if he did nearly bankrupt us. She smiled slightly. We'll see what comes of it. Over the following weeks, London society underwent a transformation that seemed to happen both gradually and all at once. The Industrial Safety Act's passage dominated conversation, with some lords praising it as necessary progress, and others condemning it as government overreach. But the criticism was muted, careful, stripped of the violent rhetoric that had characterized Halstead's opposition. Halstead himself had withdrawn from public life, citing health concerns. Everyone knew it was exile in all but name. His holdings were being quietly sold, his political connections severed. Lord Pemberton and Lord Crawford had made it clear that continued association with Halstead meant social and political death. The message was received. Meanwhile, Hawthorne threw himself into implementing the new regulations at his own holdings. He invited journalists to tour his Durham coal mines, now equipped with new ventilation systems and strictly enforced age restrictions. He published worker safety records in newspapers, holding himself accountable to public scrutiny. He even established a fund for families of workers who'd died in previous years, trying to make amends for tragedies his ignorance had allowed. He's becoming quite the reformer, Ward observed one afternoon as he and Adeline reviewed applications for the worker education program they were launching. Hawthorne, I mean. Some are calling him a traitor to his class. Others say he's the future of responsible aristocracy. He's just trying to do better, Adeline said. That's all any of us can do. Try to be better than we were yesterday. Spoken like someone who's already revolutionized society once and is looking for her next challenge. Ward grinned. What will it be? Voting rights for women? Education reform? Or perhaps you'll finally admit that the Duke of Hawthorne is courting you and stop pretending it's purely professional collaboration? Adeline felt heat rise to her cheeks. He's not courting me. We're partners in reform work. Nothing more. Partners who meet privately 3 times a week. Partners who look at each other like the rest of the world has disappeared. Partners who, Ward, don't you have some factory to inspect or legislation to draft? I do, actually. But I also have eyes, Adeline. And I see how he looks at you, how you look at him when you think no one's watching. It's not my business, of course. But for what it's worth, I think you'd be good for each other. Balance each other's extremes. After Ward left, Adeline sat alone with his words echoing in her mind. The truth was, she didn't know what to make of her relationship with Hawthorne. They worked together constantly, their partnership essential to the reform movement's success. But somewhere along the way, professional respect had transformed into something deeper, more complicated. She saw the way he commanded a room, yet listened carefully to others' perspectives. Saw his genuine remorse about past wrongs, and his determination to make amends. Saw the man beneath the title, imperfect and proud, but trying desperately to be better. And she suspected he saw her the same way, not as the reckless girl who'd challenged him at a ball, but as someone who'd survived exile and fire and emerged stronger for it. The question was whether society would ever accept a union between a duke and a merchant's daughter, whether the same people who'd condemned her months ago could celebrate her now, whether courage could overcome centuries of rigid class structure. She was still pondering this when another letter arrived, this one bearing the royal seal. Adeline stared at the envelope like it might contain poison. Royal correspondence to a merchant's daughter was unheard of. Either she was about to be honored or arrested, and she genuinely couldn't guess which. She broke the seal with trembling fingers. The letter was brief, formal, and absolutely stunning. Queen Victoria requested the pleasure of Miss Adeline Carrington's presence at Windsor Castle for a private audience. The date was set for 1 week hence. No explanation was provided, but the command was clear. "Mama!" Adeline's voice came out as a strangled whisper. "Mama, I need you." Margaret appeared within seconds, took one look at the letter, and sat down heavily. "The Queen," she breathed. "The Queen wants to meet you." "Why? What could she possibly want with me? Perhaps to commend you for your reform work, or perhaps to warn you about overstepping your station." Margaret's hands shook as she held the letter. "Adeline, this could change everything, for better or worse." "What should I do?" "You should go, obviously. One does not refuse a royal summons." Margaret stood, already planning. "We'll need to commission a proper gown, something respectful but not too humble, and you'll need coaching on proper etiquette for addressing royalty." "When was the last time you practiced curtsying?" "Mama, I don't even know if this is good news." "It doesn't matter. It's royal attention, which means it's important. Now come. We have a week to prepare and a lifetime of merchant-class habits to overcome." The week passed in a blur of fittings and etiquette lessons. Margaret drilled Adeline on proper forms of address, correct curtsying depth, and the intricacies of royal protocol. By the time the day arrived, Adeline could curtsy in her sleep and knew exactly how many steps to take before speaking to Her Majesty. Hawthorne insisted on accompanying her to Windsor, though royal protocol required him to wait in an antechamber during the actual audience. "You'll be brilliant," he assured her as their carriage approached the castle. "The Queen respects courage and honesty, both of which you have in abundance. She also respects tradition and proper social hierarchy, both of which I've thoroughly violated. Then you'll give her something interesting to think about, better than another boring audience with sycophantic nobles." The castle was overwhelming in its grandeur, ancient stone and soaring architecture, guards in ceremonial dress, paintings and tapestries depicting centuries of royal history. Adeline felt small and thoroughly out of place as servants led her through corridor after corridor. Finally, she was shown into a surprisingly modest sitting room where Queen Victoria waited. The Queen was smaller than Adeline had imagined, dressed in black as she had been since Prince Albert's death years earlier. But her eyes were sharp and assessing, missing nothing as Adeline executed her curtsy with practiced precision. "Miss Carrington, rise." The Queen's voice was firm, carrying authority that had nothing to do with volume. "We have heard much about you. Your Majesty honors me with this audience. We honor you because you have proven yourself worthy of honor. Sit." Adeline sat, her back straight, hands folded in her lap exactly as Margaret had drilled into her. Victoria studied her for a long moment. "You challenged the Duke of Hawthorne publicly, created a scandal that dominated London society for months, then somehow transformed that scandal into meaningful legislative reform. Tell us how you accomplished this." Adeline chose her words carefully. "I spoke truth when silence seemed safer, Your Majesty, and I was fortunate to find allies who valued that truth enough to fight for change. Allies like Hawthorne himself, the very man you challenged. Yes, Your Majesty. The Duke proved capable of growth that many nobles would find impossible.
He listened when he could have dismissed me, changed when he could have doubled down on old prejudices. That's genuine leadership. And you believe yourself capable of judging leadership? You, a merchant's daughter with no title or formal authority? The question was sharp, potentially dangerous. Adeline felt the weight of it, the test beneath the words. I believe truth recognizes no social hierarchy, Your Majesty. That justice should be accessible to all, regardless of birth, and that anyone, merchant or duke, woman or man, can contribute to making our nation better. Victoria's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. You are bold, Miss Carrington. Some would say too bold. They argue that young women like you threaten social stability, that encouraging such behavior will lead to chaos. I would argue that silence in the face of injustice leads to worse chaos, Your Majesty. Violence, suffering, resentment that builds until it explodes. Speaking truth may be uncomfortable, but it prevents greater disasters. Like the fires that killed 20 workers total, the violence that nearly destroyed your own family. Yes, Your Majesty, that violence happened because powerful men feared accountability. Because the system protected those who committed wrongs. The Industrial Safety Act won't prevent all future violence, but it establishes that accountability is possible. That change is achievable. That's worth any personal cost I've paid. Victoria was silent for a long moment, her gaze never leaving Adeline's face. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. We are pleased, she said simply. Pleased that young women of your generation possess such courage. Pleased that reform came through persistent advocacy rather than bloody revolution. And pleased that men like Hawthorne prove capable of growth. Adeline's heart raced. Thank you, Your Majesty. We have decided to publicly endorse the Industrial Safety Act to make clear that worker protections are not radical politics but basic human decency. This will anger some of our advisors, but we find we care less about their comfort than about justice. Victoria leaned forward slightly. We would also like to appoint you to a Royal Commission on Industrial Working Conditions. Official recognition of your expertise and advocacy. Would you accept such a position? Adeline's mind reeled. A Royal Commission meant authority, legitimacy, the ability to effect change at the highest levels of government. It also meant permanent association with reform causes, eternal separation from conventional society. But hadn't she already made that choice months ago in a ballroom filled with aristocrats? I would be honored, Your Majesty, and humbled by your faith in my abilities. It is not faith, but recognition of proven accomplishment. You have already changed England, Miss Carrington. We simply wish to make that change official. Victoria stood, signaling the audience's end. There is one more matter. The Duke of Hawthorne has petitioned us for permission to court you formally. A duke courting a merchant's daughter is unconventional. We told him we would defer to your judgment on the matter. Adeline stood frozen, her careful composure finally cracking. He what? Requested formal courtship with intent to marry, should you prove agreeable. He was quite insistent that you be consulted before any announcement, that your consent was paramount. Victoria's smile turned almost mischievous. What is your answer, Miss Carrington? Will you allow England's most reform-minded duke to court you? 1,000 thoughts crashed through Adeline's mind. The ballroom where he'd humiliated her. The carriage ride where he'd brought her home to her injured father. The countless meetings where they'd built reform legislation word by word. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. The way she looked at him the same way. Yes, she heard herself say, I would be agreeable to such courtship. Excellent. Then we give our blessing, which should silence most social objections. Though we suspect you care little for such objections. Your Majesty knows me well. We know courage when we see it. Now go. Your duke is waiting in the antechamber, probably driving our servants mad with nervous pacing. Put him out of his misery. Adeline curtsied one final time, then practically fled from the sitting room. She found Hawthorne exactly where Victoria had predicted, wearing a path in an expensive carpet. Well? He demanded. What did she say? Was she angry? Supportive? Did she mention, you petitioned the Queen for permission to court me? Adeline interrupted. Without asking me first. Hawthorne had the grace to look embarrassed.
I asked permission to ask you. There's a difference. I would never presume, that is, I wanted to do this properly. Show respect for you and your family by going through official channels. By asking the Queen's permission before asking mine? When you put it that way, it sounds rather backwards. He ran a hand through his hair, destroying its careful styling. Adeline, I'm making a mess of this. Let me start over. He took her hands in his, heedless of the servants trying not to stare. I fell for you the night you challenged me at the Ashford ball. Not immediately. I was too angry and humiliated. But later, when I realized what you'd risk to speak truth, when I saw that you cared more about justice than social acceptance, that's when I knew you were extraordinary. His gray eyes were intense, vulnerable. Then I got to know you better, saw your courage and compassion and absolutely terrifying intelligence, watched you survive exile and fire and conspiracy without losing yourself. And I realized I didn't just admire you, I loved you. Adeline's breath caught. Adrian, I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I destroyed your family's business, humiliated you publicly, made your life hell for months. I can spend the rest of my life making amends and never fully erase that damage. But despite all of that, despite everything I've done wrong, I'm asking if you might consider giving me a chance to court you properly, to prove I can be worthy of you, to build something real between us. The Queen already gave her blessing, Adeline said quietly. I told her I was agreeable to courtship. Hope blazed across his face. You did? I did. But Adrian, I need you to understand something. I'm not agreeable because you're a duke, or because royal approval makes this socially acceptable. I'm agreeable because I've seen who you really are beneath the title, because you've proven capable of change that most men would find impossible, because somewhere between hating you and working with you, I fell in love with the person you're becoming. The person I'm becoming thanks to you. No, the person you're choosing to become. I was just the catalyst. Adeline smiled. Also, if we're going to do this, there will be rules. I won't be a decorative duchess who stays silent at balls. I intend to continue my reform work, to speak publicly, to push for more change. I would expect nothing less. In fact, I'm counting on it. Someone needs to keep challenging me when I slip back into aristocratic arrogance. Then we have an understanding. Hawthorne pulled her closer, and for a moment, Adeline thought he might kiss her right there in Windsor Castle's antechamber, but he simply held her, his forehead resting against hers, and whispered, I will spend every day trying to deserve you. I'll hold you to that promise. The engagement announcement hit London society like a thunderbolt. A duke marrying a merchant's daughter was scandalous enough, but the Duke of Hawthorne marrying the woman who'd publicly humiliated him? It was unprecedented, shocking, and absolutely dominated conversation. The reactions split sharply along predictable lines. Conservative aristocrats condemned it as the final proof that Hawthorne had betrayed his class. Progressive reformers celebrated it as a triumph of merit over birth. Common people found the whole thing romantic, in a fairy tale sort of way. Adeline's family had mixed responses. Henry was thrilled, already imagining himself connected to a duke's household. Thomas was cautiously optimistic, having worked with Hawthorne on rebuilding the shipping business and developed grudging respect. Margaret was the most conflicted. A duchess, she said wonderingly, helping Adeline prepare for yet another society function. My daughter, a duchess. I never dared dream so high. It's not about the title, Mama. You know that. I do. And I also know that titles matter in this world, whether we want them to or not. You'll have power now, real power to affect change. Use it wisely. I will. Though I'll probably still manage to scandalize you regularly. Margaret laughed, a real sound of genuine amusement. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. You wouldn't be my daughter otherwise. The wedding was scheduled for late spring, giving society time to adjust to the scandalous union. Hawthorne wanted something grand and public, a statement that he was proud to marry Adeline regardless of social convention. Adeline wanted something smaller, more intimate, focused on the meaning rather than spectacle. They compromised with a ceremony at St. Paul's Cathedral, grand enough to satisfy Hawthorne's sense of occasion, but with a guest list that included workers from his estates, reform advocates, and other people who would never normally be invited to an aristocratic wedding. The day itself was perfect. May sunshine streamed through stained glass, painting the cathedral in jeweled colors. Nobles and commoners filled the pews in equal measure, a mixing of social classes that felt genuinely revolutionary. Adeline wore a gown of ivory silk that managed to be both elegant and practical, with none of the excessive ornamentation that characterized most aristocratic weddings. Her mother had wept at the final fitting, overcome with emotion she couldn't quite name. As Adeline walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she saw faces from every part of her journey. Caleb Ward, beaming with pride. Lord Pemberton, looking approving despite his conservative instincts. Workers from Durham, whom Hawthorne had personally invited. And at the altar, Adrian Hawthorne, Duke of Hawthorne, watching her approach with an expression of wonder and love. The ceremony itself was traditional enough to satisfy protocol, but included modifications that reflected their values. They pledged not just to love and honor each other, but to work together toward justice and accountability. To use their combined power responsibly. To never forget the people whose suffering had brought them together. When it came time for the vows, Hawthorne surprised her. "Adeline," he said, his voice carrying through the cathedral, "you challenged me when no one else dared, showed me truth I'd been avoiding, forced me to become better than I was. Today I vow not just to love you, but to keep becoming worthy of that love. To listen when you challenge me. To change when I'm wrong. To use my power to protect rather than oppress. And to build a world where courage matters more than birth, where justice is accessible to all, and where no one has to risk everything just to speak truth." Adeline felt tears streaming down her face. When her turn came, she spoke from the heart. "Adrian, you proved that even the proudest can learn humility. That power can be wielded with wisdom rather than cruelty. That change is always possible for those brave enough to attempt it. Today I vow to keep challenging you when you need it, supporting you when you struggle, and loving you through all of it. To be your partner in every sense, equal in our marriage and our work. And to never let either of us forget that we serve something bigger than ourselves." They exchanged rings forged from metal taken from the Durham mines, a symbolic reclamation of suffering transformed into commitment. Then the Archbishop pronounced them married, and Hawthorne kissed her with thorough enthusiasm that made the traditional crowd gasp and the reformers cheer. As they walked back down the aisle together, Adeline noticed something remarkable. The nobles and commoners who'd entered separately were now mingling, talking, discovering they had more in common than they'd imagined. It wasn't revolution exactly, but it was change. Real, visible, meaningful change. The reception was held at Hawthorne's London residence, transformed for the occasion into something that bridged worlds. Fine china sat beside simple earthenware. Champagne flowed alongside good English ale. Aristocrats traded stories with factory workers about industrial reform, finding common ground in shared humanity. Adeline moved through the crowd with Adrian at her side, no longer merchant's daughter or disgraced challenger, but Duchess of Hawthorne and respected advocate. People who'd snubbed her months ago now sought her opinion. Lords who'd condemned her courage now praised her influence on their duke. "Enjoying your triumph?" Ward appeared with 2 glasses of champagne, handing her one. "You've successfully infiltrated the aristocracy and subverted it from within. Quite the accomplishment." "I married the man I love," Adeline corrected. "The social revolution is just a bonus." Still, the merchant's daughter who became a duchess, the woman who challenged a duke and married him. You'll be a legend. "I'd rather be effective than legendary. Legends are stories. I want results." "You'll get both. You and Hawthorne together, you're going to reshape England whether the aristocracy is ready or not." Later, as the party continued around them, Hawthorne pulled Adeline onto the balcony overlooking the gardens. London spread out before them, a city of millions where workers and lords, merchants and nobles all tried to build lives worth living. "Any regrets?" he asked, pulling her close. "About marrying you?" "None." Adeline leaned against him. "About challenging you that night at the Ashford ball? Still none. Though I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if I'd stayed silent. We'd both be smaller people, less capable of change, less aware of the world beyond our comfortable assumptions." He kissed her temple. "I'm grateful you had the courage to speak, even if it terrified me at the time." You hid the terror well behind aristocratic outrage. I'm a duke. We're trained from birth to hide everything behind aristocratic outrage. He turned her to face him. But with you, I don't want to hide. Don't want to pretend I have all the answers or that I'm infallible. I just want to be honest, to keep learning, to keep becoming better. Then we'll keep learning together. Adeline smiled. Though I warn you, I'm not going to stop challenging you just because we're married. If anything, I'll be more demanding now that I have permanent access. I'm counting on it. Someone has to keep me accountable. They stood together as the sun set over London, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside, their wedding guests celebrated, nobles and commoners, reformers and reluctant converts, all united by the belief that change was possible when people had courage enough to demand it. It wasn't a perfect world they'd created. The Industrial Safety Act had loopholes and enforcement would be inconsistent. Conservative opposition still fought worker protections at every turn. Children still suffered in factories and mines across England. But it was better than it had been. And tomorrow, they'd work to make it better still. Adeline thought about that night at the Ashford ball, about the terrified girl who'd challenged a duke because staying silent felt worse than any consequence she might face. She thought about the choice that had cost her everything and given her more than she'd ever imagined. Some people might call it luck. Others might call it destiny. Adeline knew it was simply courage, the courage to speak truth when silence seemed safer, to fight for change when comfort was easier, to risk everything for the possibility of something better. And as Hawthorne pulled her into another kiss, the Duke and Duchess united not just in marriage but in purpose. She knew that courage had been worth every price she'd paid. The woman who'd challenged the Duke had become the Duchess who would challenge the world. And the real work was just beginning.